Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Assalamu alaikum. Talking. This is the double streaming. We're streaming here on YouTube and on Clubhouse. All right, just bear with us. I'm waiting on my co-host of the show, brother Wissam Al Mahdi. Just waiting for him to come on through. We're going to be discussing this topic together. He's the one that had the interaction, the small interaction with Bart Erhman that, brings into question the certainty of his position on the crucifixion. All right. So we're going to be discussing that on today's show. Just give me a few, while we're waiting for the brother to show up, give me a few moments. Oh, here he is right here. Alhamdulillah. Give me I already sent out the tweets and everything. So yeah, so we're good, inshallah. I don't really have to do that because I already sent out the tweets. Well, I could do a quick tweet just to let everybody know that we're actually live right now to join us. So let me do that. Ping some of your people here on Clubhouse, all right? So that we let them share the room, let them know that we're here, we're having this good discussion. Okay, and we're also live on YouTube. All right. So okay, I think with that we can go ahead and get. Let me go ahead. I took the sound off. Let me go ahead and so state that again. So as you see, the subject is Bart Erhman really certain of the crucifixion of Jesus? Right. We're simulcasting here on YouTube and on Clubhouse. All right. And basically, this subject brings into question the certainty of his position. Now, it is stated, as a disclaimer, we're making sure that he has stated, and you can read it on his blog, where he states very clearly that he feels that the crucifixion of Jesus is one of the most certain things, about Jesus, right? He does state that. However, when you read the rest of his material, though, you seem to wonder, how is he saying that based upon the other things that he says, right? How is he saying that it's one of the most certain things about Jesus? Yet when you read his other material, you're like, well, wait a minute, you're saying this, which conflicts with the situation, the incident being certain. And we're going to examine that. We're going to examine that today. And the brother here, Wissam, he has, he's a member of Bart Erhman's blog, and he had an interaction with him where, again, this exposed this. And then we're going to look at other things that Bart Erhman has said on his own blog, which, will make you wonder, how is he holding this certain position based upon these other things that he said? Okay, so I'm gonna let Brother Wissam come in and kind of give us a setup of how the interaction started. We'll show you on the screen the interaction, and we'll take it from there. We'll let it flow from there. All right, so don't forget, ping your people, invite them to the room. Let's get people, because I'm sure they want to hear this. I'm sure they want to hear this information. All right, go ahead, Brother Wissam. Let the people know a little bit about how things went down with you and Mr. Erhman.
Assalamu alaikum. So the objective of this room is pretty obvious. We're trying to really discern the level of certainty that people like Bart Erhman place on, supposed facts of antiquity, like the crucifixion of Isa alayhi salam. And inshallah ta'ala, we're going to do it from various different viewpoints. Dissecting his claims, looking at the evidence of his claims, putting forward our own counterclaims, inshallah ta'ala. So it's going to be very interesting. But, how it went down was, I think this was like last year. I didn't even look at the date of the comments. But, so I was reading a blog post that he wrote about, it was entitled, "Did They Crucify the Wrong Guy?" Very lucid and, provocative. So I read it, and in it he started engaging with the history of the supposed origins of this claim that Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, peace be upon him, was not the person who was actually crucified. It was someone else, and the Romans just got the wrong guy. And so this was an actual thing that I've been mulling over for a long time, and of course it's the Islamic position, that it was not Jesus, peace be upon him, that was put on the cross. It was not Isa alayhi salam. It was rather someone else. And it was actually very. I was elated to see that he was even engaging with this particular theory, because a lot of Christians, they have no idea. They're completely in the dark about these traditions. That there were early Christians, 1st and 2nd century Christians, who had the same idea. Usually they will say, oh, Muslims came along, quote unquote, 500 years later or 600 years later. Some of them say 700 years later. That's how uninformed they are. And say, Islam came about this many years later, and no one has heard about this. We've always had what's called like ijma', a consensus on the crucifixion since day one, and Islam came and just kind of reshuffled the deck. And why are we supposed to believe it? But I was glad that Erhman was even touching on the subject. So he basically wrote a blog post about, how likely is this theory, or just kind of getting it out there. So I commented after reading the blog post. Let me pull it up now. Yeah, so the blog post is called, "Did They Crucify the Wrong Guy? Jesus' Identity Switch." And so this came actually on the very next day of, the previous day, he had written another blog post about the Coptic Apocalypse of Peter, which is another, 1st century, 2nd century sect. We'll get to how scholars even date these various scriptures, whether they're apocryphal or canonical. But he wrote a blog post about the Apocalypse of Peter that kind of had a separationist Christology. Which basically is that Isa alayhi salam did not a version of separationist Christology, which is on the cross. Isa alayhi salam was not the one who died, but rather it was an image, or kind of like a phantasm or projection of Isa alayhi salam, while Jesus was actually, above the cross. Whether it was somebody else or something like that. And so basically it was a doketic type of. Doketic is a term that's used to describe certain groups within Christianity in the very early centuries who did not see Isa alayhi salam as having flesh and blood. And there are various iterations of this. They thought he was just like a spirit that didn't really suffer. His body couldn't really suffer because he didn't have flesh and blood. And there's a whole debate and theories about whether the passages in, for example, like of Luke, in the upper room in the Gospel of John, which are basically like the 2 latest Gospels, why they incorporate passages such as, "Look at my hands and feet, for surely a spirit hath no flesh and bone," right? Or, "Give me something to eat," and he eats broiled fish and honeycomb. He reiterates it again, "Feel my side, put your hand upon me and see that out." There's a book called Seeing Enuma, the polemic purposes of the Gospel according to Luke. And in it, he describes how these statements were injected into the story, into the narrative, in these later Gospels, Luke and John, in order to, and it's really beyond question that they're the latest Gospels. Most scholars agree with this, that they were injected to deal with these doketics, which means they existed prior to those Gospels being written. So anyway, that was the whole thing that he was discussing. And so I read the blog post, and most of it is factual, and he discusses it, pretty succinctly. It's only a couple of paragraphs. And so I began by, very cordially saying, "Greetings, Professor Erhman." Should I do this now, or wait for more people to show up in the audience?
Yeah, I guess we could just let it roll. They'll just have to catch up, inshallah.
Okay, sure, yeah. So, what I wrote, I began pretty, cordially, and just said
very short, very quick. I'm on the screen for those on YouTube. I'm going to show you the screen right now, so you can see what the brother's talking about. See his interaction. There it is on the screen right now. So those who are watching on YouTube, you can see the interaction that the brother Wissam started with Erhman. So go ahead, continue from there.
Okay, yeah, sure. So as you can see, I wrote, "Greetings, Professor Erhman. I have a question. To my knowledge, and of course, we don't mean to sugarcoat this in any way, this is the Islamic position. So perhaps, maybe, who knows what I would be thinking if I wasn't a Muslim, but I'm glad. I'm actually glad, because the evidence is so, I think it is very heavy in our direction. So I said, greetings, Professor Erhman. I have a question. To my knowledge, there are a few early Christian documents, some reconstructions. What I mean by that is some have actually been uncovered as full extant manuscripts, and I'll identify which ones those are from the list I provide. And some are reconstructions based on some patristic citations, early church fathers just mentioning a verse or two from them, or heresiologists attacking them and mentioning them in their works. So there are a few early Christian documents, some reconstructions, that don't seem to mention the crucifixion at all, or deny that Jesus was physically the one to be crucified. One is, of course, the Q source document. Now, regardless of who says otherwise, the Q source hypothesis, or the two source hypothesis, is still the dominant opinion within textual criticism. It might be called something else. They might have different nomenclature for it, but Q basically is the German word for Quelle, which means source. And this pertains to the sources that both Matthew and Luke use that are independent of Mark. And they seem to have primitive Christologies, and there's other criteria that are used to establish what that source is. So Q, in its entirety, has no passion narrative. Nothing about the crucifixion, nothing about the resurrection. But it contains actually things that are contrary to that, like the sign of Jonah, for one, okay, or the temptation of the devil on the mountain, saying, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here." The second treatise of the Great Seth. This is an actual manuscript dated to within the 2nd century, and again, dating these documents is very hard. So paleographically, this text dates to like the 3rd century. That means when that particular text was written. The second treatise is dated to the 2nd century, because that's when the first person, the earliest person who mentions it, wrote about it, which is, in this case, Irenaeus, most likely. And so it would be very hard to get anything pre-Irenaeus, because there weren't heresiologists before Irenaeus, so to speak, other than a few early church fathers who didn't really mention sects as they did just kind of overall mention the heresy of their time. So it could very well be first century. And we know that the idea that Simon of Cyrene was the one who was crucified was for sure present in the 1st century. But the document itself, 1st or 2nd century. Like a lot of the canonical texts of the New Testament are 1st and 2nd century. The Didache, 1st century document, mentions nothing about the crucifixion whatsoever. Let's see here. The Coptic Apocalypse of Peter, early document, explicitly says that Jesus wasn't crucified. Doesn't it denies the actual fact. Gospel of Thomas, 114 to 116 sayings, describing different messages and different themes and different creeds that Jesus, peace be upon him, told his disciples, and Thomas specifically. Mentions nothing about his crucifixion at all. And many scholars date this gospel to be pre-Gospel of Mark, so earlier than whatever the first canonical gospel that we have. The Gospel of the Basilidians, which we don't have today, but we know existed. This is Basilides was a late 1st, early 2nd century theologian who maintained that it was Simon of Cyrene who was crucified, and not Jesus, alayhi salam, not Isa alayhi salam. And he was using a document. We don't have that anymore. All we have are heresiologists attacking him and outlining, whether truthfully or fallaciously, his creeds and his beliefs. Okay, so I mentioned some, and there are more. There are many more that actually don't mention the crucifixion or deny it outright. But I only mentioned those 6. So I said, Bar Erhman, am I wrong in any one of these or more? And are there other texts of this nature? Okay. And lastly, I know some churches in the East considered Pilate a saint. Is there any possibility that that this is because he might have let Jesus the Christ go and instead handed Jesus Barabbas to the Jews or Romans, depending on how you read the text, because in some of the Gospels it says, and Jesus handed him over to them. And the last people that were being actually spoken about were the Jews, the Jewish crowds, and not the Romans. So it's feasible that he was talking about the actual Jews. This would explain why Jesus is saying Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani in the earliest accounts. God, oh God, why have you forsaken me? And later authors embellished and improved that account. This is from everything, from who Barabbas was, what it said on the cross, what happened to Jesus on the cross, what he said, everything. There's a whole Christological development within every piece of that story. This would also explain why the disciples appeared shocked to see him alive afterwards. Because had he been preaching his resurrection, surely the disciples would have been expecting it. Now, there's a difference of opinion whether Jesus' ministry lasted 1 year or 3 years or 5 years, but still a significant amount of time. And then you just can't really imagine that prior to that ministry, he wasn't saying anything about the crucifixion or resurrection. Let's say he was just completely silent on it, and we can focus just on that window of time. If those quote-unquote passion predictions in the Gospels were historically reliable, then how is it that all of the people, not just his disciples, everyone, was crying at his crucifixion? They were defending him. They picked up swords to defend him with. He himself prayed to be saved from it. These are all possible, controversies that existed within his day that some of these canonical texts could have been produced in order to combat. And we know this for a fact for at least some of the ideas. So I said this would explain it better. Instead of saying, perhaps they hallucinated, perhaps they were crazy or just dumb, perhaps he never mentioned his crucifixion. And that once they saw him alive, they were legitimately shocked because they thought he had died. But he was physically alive. No resurrection, no empty tomb, which Erhman actually says the empty tomb is a forgery. It never happened. Okay, so he denies that aspect of the New Testament story at least. And so he says some don't mention the crucifixion because they are about other things. This is a common rebuttal to that. Some give a different interpretation of it. The final one doesn't exist any longer, but is summarized by a church father who says that the Romans crucified the wrong guy because Jesus pulled an identity switch. Exactly. So let's dissect some of that. He said because they are talking about other things. Q is not talking about other things. It's literally every single time that Matthew and Luke agree verbatim or in theme to something that is not found in Mark. So it's inconceivable that it would just be completely absent of a crucifixion or a passion prediction. You have to ask yourself why the earliest account doesn't have that. Okay, the second treatise of the Great Seth, a full text that doesn't mention the crucifixion and denies it and says it was somebody else. The Didache, outlines an entire list of protocols and procedures for the early apostles. Doesn't mention the crucifixion. Imagine an outline of mosque activity, or how to pray, or what to do when you're going out to preach to others, and you don't mention like Tawheed or the 5 pillars or something like that. Paul specifically says that without the crucifixion and the resurrection, the preaching is in vain. And to have the entire text of the Didache not mention the crucifixion is just absurd. The Coptic Apocalypse of Peter, a full text, does it, and rejects the crucifixion of Isa. The Gospel of Thomas, 114 sayings. So the crucifixion is batting 0 for 114. I mean, it couldn't fit anywhere in there. And not only that, but it's not even in its original form. There have been studies done on all 3 transmissions of the Gospel of Thomas that show that it has underwent extensive redaction and extensive corrections and revisions, and yet none of them were about the crucifixion. That for one speaks to its early date and speaks about perhaps the late date of the crucifixion. The Gospel of the Basilidians. Now, Basilides, we'll get into him a little bit later. inshallah ta'ala. But it suffices you to know for now that he was very popular. So popular that he actually prompted, for him and his followers, prompted numerous heresiologists to write, many treatises countering his theology. Where was he? He's actually our first known reference for the Gospel of John. He cites a passage in which Isa alayhi salam says, "My time is not yet." There are two places in the Gospel of John that say this, nowhere else in the synoptic tradition. So he is our first quotation of the Gospel of John, and he's the first church writer that we know of that to actually write a commentary on the Gospels or on the deeds. He writes something very similar to Papias's exposition of the Logia. So he's not an insignificant person. So if he's writing commentary, why doesn't why doesn't he just look at the New Testament? Why doesn't he just read it? How is he deriving these teachings? I mean, it seems to me that he had a version of the Gospels. Tradition says he was using the Gospel according to Mark, and we'll go through that a little bit later as well. But if he had a full text, because he's writing, supposedly, according to most scholars, around the year 110, 120. So if you assume the traditional dating of the Gospels, that's around 40 years of proliferation from Mark or Matthew. And both of them have crucifixion accounts. So what is he reading? And what are the previous people reading? Because he has a chain that Clement of Alexandria says goes back to Peter himself, through Glaucius. So, I mean, those questions have to be answered. So this is what I asked him. I said, isn't this more plausible? And then he answered with some don't mention it, yada yada. And then I responded to that by saying, I've read different renderings of Thomas, and it seems it speaks about a whole host of things, which is true. Anyone can read it. Go to earlychristianwritings.com, and you can read the Gospel of Thomas in numerous translations of theological value. I find it very peculiar that it doesn't mention a crucifixion. Also, the Didache mentions baptism, early Christian beliefs, which the Pauline letters are almost exclusively centered around the cross, but doesn't mention anything about the crucifixion. Also, Professor Erhman, now this is the key question. I said, also, Professor Erhman, from a purely naturalistic perspective, wouldn't someone else being crucified and the disciples seeing the real Jesus afterwards, wouldn't someone else being crucified and the disciples seeing the real Jesus afterwards be more plausible than some theories like mass hallucinations or visions? Now keep in mind, again, we'll discuss this later, there are so many things that the gospel writers insert into the narrative that have no explanation. Jesus looking like someone else being dressed as a gardener. No explanation whatsoever. A young man wearing nothing but a linen cloth at the time of Jesus' arrest makes a scene. They try to grab him. He runs away naked and just runs away naked, and that's all that's said about him. Right? And there were other ones we'll discuss later, inshallah. But just now, it suffices us to just look at this particular correspondence. And this is what he says. And this is what baffled me. He said, hallucinations and visions happen all the time. What he means by this is, assuming the crucifixion happened, how the disciples were convinced of Jesus' resurrection were that all of them had the same exact hallucination. Every single one. That he was raised from the dead, and he tells them to go preach his resurrection. This apparently happens all the time. I don't know. I'm sure actually that he's done research into this, but I've tried myself to look at these things. I haven't found any examples of something like that happening, to where people are so convinced that they would, risk their lives over a hallucination, or change their lives to adopt a particular set of teachings based on hallucination, and then all of it happening simultaneously within a short amount of time. And he said, but I've never heard of a lookalike being crucified. He says, I've never heard of a look. Now, the precedence of this actually notwithstanding, is it really that hard to conceive of someone being wrongfully accused, or not being wrongfully punished? How many people? I mean, you don't even have to have a vivid imagination or a really strong imagination to think there are absolutely, for someone to deny this, I think is a little bit crazy, that there are people on, for example, death row who have been executed that were innocent. Is that really like, far-fetched or absurd or something that's highly unlikely or unbelievable? I don't think so. I've never heard of a look-alike being crucified. You've never heard of the police apprehending someone who looked like someone else? Really? Especially in a day in a day where they were Jews particularly they had a certain distinct appearance. Romans had a certain distinct appearance. The Phoenicians had a certain distinct appearance or whatever, clothing, anatomical features, hairstyle, or whatever. So it's more likely that people hallucinated all at the same time about the same exact thing than about the Romans grabbing someone else, which is absurd. And we know that there were certain instances where the first thing that people jumped to was a resurrection. Oh my God! It must have been a resurrection when they see something or someone that might have looked like someone or acted like someone after the death of someone they knew. For example, like Herod. When Herod heard about Isa alayhi salam and he didn't know who he was, what did he say? He said, "This must be John the Baptist coming back from the dead." But what did it turn out to be? It turned out, no, it was someone who just resembled John the Baptist. Isa alayhi salam. His preaching was exactly similar. So you have a precedence for this in the Gospels, where someone jumps to conclusions and says, "Oh, it was a resurrection," when it's actually not a resurrection. It says, "I've never heard of a lookalike being crucified." So what happens? This is also a very key statement that he makes. So what happens fairly regularly? Again, so he's saying hallucinations, mass hallucinations of the same exact phenomena, happens fairly regularly, is as a rule more probable than something that is not known to have happened. This was his answer to me. That it's more probable because hallucinations happen more often than people being mistaken, like a mistaken identity. I don't know who would agree with that, but you guys can comment and mull it over in your own minds. But basically, even if what he's saying is true, what this is an admission of is when the points are brought to him in a academic and a lucid way, it's no longer, "Oh my God, you silly Muslim, you obnoxious, dogmatic, unacademic person, you. How can you deny the crucifixion? It's as if you're denying that the sky is blue." He's saying no. He's saying it's more probable than something that's not known to have happened. It's just a higher probability. And that's really what most of them believe about anything in antiquity. Anything about Jesus' life is a matter of probability. And so that's why we really don't like when people play the game of, "Oh no, we're absolutely certain that it happened." Because when you kind of confront them with the counter evidence, and this has actually been done, of course we believe Isa alayhi salam existed because of the Quran. We don't need any extra Quranic sources to tell us Isa alayhi salam existed. But a lot of the evidence that mainstream scholars even put forward for the existence of Isa alayhi salam is House of Cards level flimsy. But they, again, you'll hear Erhman saying, to deny that Jesus existed is like denying that your parents existed or something like that. But if you're familiar with these debates and the evidences that are put forward, it's not that. I mean, historically, it was 2,000 years ago. Most of the first century evidence almost all of first century evidence is gone with the wind. So you cannot establish anything like that outside of a theological intervention. Like, if you believe that the Quran is the word of God based on certain criteria, or the Bible is the word of God or whatever, then you have that level of personal certainty. But to try to establish academic, scholarly, historical certainty on something that happened 2,000 years ago with zero primary sources is absolutely insane. So it's dishonest to say that even with the existence of Isa alayhi salam as an academic. But he does it on the peripheral aspects, on the tangential aspects of the things pertaining to his life. And I think that's also irresponsible and dishonest. But we can go through also the how he substantiates other aspects of the Gospels and declares those to be inconceivable, although the Gospels themselves record them, and yet that doesn't make him doubt the narrative of the Gospels about Isa being crucified. Should we go to the portion about Barabbas?
Yeah. So here's what I want to do. So all right. So everybody, you got those who are watching, and by the way, people in Clubhouse have just come in. If you want to see the actual content of what we're talking about, just go to my YouTube channel, Mr. Islam Answers Back, and you'll see the live stream where we actually show the interaction from the blog online, on the screen. By the way, I don't know if I have to say this, but just in case, we're using this content under fair use. Although some of the stuff we're showing, you don't have to be a member of his site. You can just, there's a certain, I guess what I call it, like he allows people to, if you're not a member of his site, to see portions of his responses and stuff like that. But just in case, this is fair use. We're using this under fair use, the Fair Use Act, which allows you to use material that may be copyrighted or whatever for the purposes of criticisms or to educate people about things. So I just want to say that as a disclaimer. And of course, Wissam is a member of the blog, so I would assume that he has permission to use his own his own interaction. Okay, so let's go to this where we start to see what Brother Wissam is talking about, which appears to be Erhman seems to be inconsistent in his in his position, what I mean? So, and let me say this very quickly too, that, we respect Professor Erhman. We like his material, especially when it comes to, textual criticism of the Bible and the history of the different Christian beliefs and sects and things like that. So I want to make that clear. We're not completely throwing him under the bus and throwing him away. But on this particular subject, this needs to be addressed because a lot of Muslims, we like to use his material when it comes to, the unreliability of the Bible or the Gospels and things of that nature, So a lot of Muslims like to reference him in addition to other, scholars, Bible scholars as well. But a lot of times Christians will respond when it comes to the issue of the crucifixion. They say, hey, well, you guys like Erhman, but Bart Ehrman says that the crucifixion is the most, certain thing in history or whatever. And he does say that. He does say that. However, when you look at his other material that may be, like I said, on the outskirts of the issue of the crucifixion, it seems to go against that position that it's the most certain thing, which is what Brother Wissam just alluded to right there. So we're going to get into that. Okay, we're going to get into that. So I'm looking at one of his, you can see it on the screen, those who are watching on YouTube. And it's from his blog, Why Was Jesus Crucified? Bart Ehrman Crucifixion Thoughts. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit of it, not to be boring, but just to give you, some, so you can get a good grasp of what it is. And then we'll show you where we feel that he's inconsistent in his position about it. Right? So here's what he says. It starts off, why was Jesus crucified? All the questions I get from members of the blog are good and interesting and deserve lengthy response. Now, every now and then I get one that is absolutely fundamental to understanding Jesus, the New Testament, and the history of early Christianity. Here is one of them. From many years ago, with an issue that everyone interested in these topics really needs to have a reasoned view about. Here's the question and my view. So the questioner says, I don't see the rationale for the Romans to crucify Jesus. It doesn't appear that he verbalized any anti-Roman propaganda, nor anything anti-Roman alluded to in Josephus's couple of lines on Jesus. Pilate probably didn't even know who Jesus was. Possibly, this is in parentheses, possibly the bouncing back and forth between Herod was legend. So his response, Bart Ehrman's response, was yes, it's a great question and completely central to the story of Jesus. Why was he crucified? First off, I agree the Herod story is almost certainly not historical. It's found only in Luke and is part of Luke's attempt to show that Pilate was innocent and wanted nothing to do with Jesus's execution, i.e. he tried to fob him off on the ruler of Galilee. Herod too finds him innocent. So if the ruling authorities aren't to blame, who is? He says it's those blasted Jews, right? So he goes on to say that why Christ was crucified, his thoughts, right? It would take an entire book to answer your question adequately, but I do want to say a couple of things about it. And here's where he makes the statement. Everybody get ready. The crucifixion of Jesus by the Romans is one of the most secure facts we have about his life. Now, as you'll see, we're going to show why he claims that it's one of the allegedly the most secure facts. But you'll find out that it's based upon the very scriptures that Mr. Erhman has told us are historically unreliable. They're not written by eyewitnesses. And this what I'm saying right now is from his, you can read the transcript of his debate with, I believe it was William Lane Craig, where they debated the resurrection, right? And he talks about, he says that very statement, that these gospels they're historically unreliable. They're written by people who are living, decades later or in centuries later or whatever. They're not eyewitnesses. You know what I mean? So he gives all these reasons to not trust them. But yet then here he goes back to believing or giving credence to them, you know what I'm saying? By saying, well, he believes that it actually happened because of something that's from the very books that he says are unreliable. So I'm like, this seems very inconsistent, Mr. Erhman. So here's what he says. So he says, yes, the crucifixion of Jesus by the Romans is one of the most secure facts we have about his life. So he bases his argument on the charge, right? When you read the rest of the article here, and again, for those who are not members, even if you go to his blog, you can read a sample of it. And I got it from just a sample. I'm not a member, but I got it from just reading the sample that he allows people to see, and then it stops and you have to become a member to read the rest of it, right? So let's see. Let's read where he talks about his reason, right? So let's see. He says, whenever anyone writes a book about the historical Jesus, it is really, really important to see if what they say about his public ministry can make sense of his death. If not, then you have a problem. For example, if Jesus is best understood principally as a great rabbi who taught his followers they should love one another and even love their enemies, why would the Romans execute him? Oh no, we can't have you loving us to the cross with you. Or, he's being sarcastic, right? Or if Jesus was a Jewish cynic philosopher who taught his followers not to be invested in the material things of this world, but to share what they have and be concerned only with spiritual things, what would make that a capital offense? How many cynics were crucified? Or if Jesus were principally interested in equality for women or in having his followers adopt proto-Marxist principles or whatever, why was he killed? Right? So he goes on to say, what is clear is that Jesus was killed on political charges and nothing else. Many people seem to think that Jesus ran afoul of the authorities because he committed blasphemy or offended the religious sensitivities of the Jewish leaders of his day, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, Sanhedrin, etc. But in fact, the Romans didn't care, and I want y'all to pay attention to what he's saying here. But in fact, the Romans didn't care a twit about Jewish blasphemy or about internal Jewish disputes about doctrine and or practice. Now, I want to stop here and speak myself. So this is interesting that he says that, right? He says the Romans didn't care about that, right? But this is what the Jews are bringing him up on charges for, right? They're claiming that he committed blasphemy or whatever. And then the charge switches to the claim about of King of the Jews, right? So this is where he says that's why he believes it's true. Let's go to that, right? So he says, why was Jesus executed? Because he called himself, listen what he, now this is interesting, pay attention. This is Bart Erhman speaking. He says, this is his headline in the article or the blog as it goes down. He says, why was Jesus executed? Because he called himself the King of the Jews. Now, this is interesting that Mr. Erhman puts this as this title, because as we're going to read later, he then acknowledges that Jesus never did that. Meaning he never called himself King of the Jews in the Gospels. Mr. Erhman admits that Jesus never said that about himself in the Gospels. He admits that the early Christians never said that about him either until later. So this is interesting that he believes that that's the reason why Jesus was killed, yet he admits he never said that in the Gospels. Right? He admits he never said that in the Gospels, and he admits that the early Christians didn't call him that. So then why is he claiming that he believes that he was killed for that reason? So I'll read a little bit. It says he didn't mean it in a spiritual sense, that the Romans didn't interpret it in a spiritual excuse me, did I read that wrong? He didn't mean it in a spiritual sense, and the Romans didn't interpret it in a spiritual sense. That's interesting, because he did mean it in a spiritual sense, right? Being king meant being the political leader of the people of Israel. and only the Roman governor or someone the Romans appointed, like Herod, could be king. Anyone else who claimed to be a king was usurping Roman prerogatives and was seen as a threat, or if not a threat, at least a public nuisance. Romans had ways of dealing with lower class peasants who were troublemakers and public nuisances. They crucified them, right? They crucified them. So there are lots of reasons for thinking this is really, so here's what he says. Yes, he says, there are lots of reasons for thinking that this really was the charge against Jesus. Now, I'm stopping again. I don't understand how he could say this. He knows very well that there really aren't a lot of good reasons for this, as we'll discuss as we go on. Some of those is that Pilate said he was innocent, right? When you read the gospel stories where Jesus is being questioned by Pilate, Pilate asks him about this king of the Jews thing, and Jesus tells him, my kingdom is not of this world, which shows that it is actually, he actually is admitting that his kingdom is spiritual. So therefore, it really doesn't pose a threat to the Romans. And Pilate when you read the story, Pilate seems to understand that and agree. And he says, hey, this man is innocent. He's innocent of this stuff. He obviously is no threat to the Roman power. He's not trying to, claim that he's going to take power from us or overthrow us. The man says his kingdom is not of this world. Pilate pretty much said, okay, this man is innocent. I don't want his blood on my hands. Even in Luke, Pilate's wife sends him a letter saying, hey, leave this man alone. He's innocent, basically. And Pilate agrees. This man is innocent. Yeah, I don't see no reason to charge. He goes out. He even goes back to the Jews and says, I have no reason to charge him. Right. So I don't understand how Mr. Erhman is claiming that that's his reason why it's a secure fact, is that the charge, when the scriptures that he is going back to, to believe it. But in other cases, he says they're unreliable and they're not eyewitness accounts or whatever. He's using that. Yet the story itself says that he was in charge with that. Right. Those of you familiar with the story, you can read it in the Gospels, particularly, you can read it in any of them, basically. But you'll see that in the story, Pilate agrees Jesus is innocent of these charges. He obviously doesn't think he's trying to be claimed to be the literal or worldly king of the Jews. He wants to release him. He says, I have no reason to charge him. The only reason that he decides to execute Jesus is not because he was guilty, and which is going to bring us to another argument as well. I know I'm going a lot, but which was the supposed claim that every year for the Passover, Pilate allegedly releases a prisoner of the Jews choosing to, he lets a person free. Now, this is also a problem because, and matter of fact, we're going to show you that Mr. Erhman admits in one of his other blogs that this appears to be unhistorical or ahistorical, that there's no evidence that Pilate did this. Right. There's no evidence that he did release a prisoner to the Jews or whatever the case may be. So that's another problem. But in any case, since we're going to go with his acceptance of the alleged charge of Jesus being king of the Jews, which involves this story, Pilate says he's innocent. He doesn't want to charge him. So he says, look, to the Jews, I released somebody to you. Here, I got two people. I got this guy, Jesus the Christ, and I got this other guy, Jesus, the Son of the Father, or Jesus Barabbas. I'll release one of them too for you, because he's basically trying to see if he can let Jesus off the hook, it appears. But the crowd is like, no, kill Jesus. We'll take Jesus Barabbas to be released. Right. So he releases him allegedly. Right. And that's the reason why Jesus is killed. He's not killed, Mr. Erhman, which you should know. He's not killed based upon the charge of being king of the Jews. He's released. He's killed because the Jews chose him to be killed rather than Jesus Barabbas, right? Which is, again, another problem which we're going to discuss as well. But here, so let me top it off by reading what Mr. Erhman says at least to the end of the blog part that he allows the non-subscribers to read, right? He says this. He says, it is completely credible contextually, since the Romans did not execute people for no reason at all or for offending the religious sensitivities of other Jews. Moreover, and even more important, the charge is multiply attested in our various sources. Hey, look what he's doing. Mark, John, at both trial and crucifixion scene. So he's going right back to the sources that he tells us are unreliable. They're historically unreliable. He says this himself, right, in his material. He says, more than that, it is not a charge Christians would have invented and inserted into these stories, i.e., according to him, it passes the criterion of dissimilarity. So he says the reason is clear. King of the Jews is not a, look, he admits it. King of the Jews is not a term Jesus ever uses of himself in the gospel. This is Mr. Erhman talking in his book. He says this. So if he is admitting that Jesus never said this, how does he believe then that Pilate would have accepted this charge against him when he admits the man never even said this, right? He never even said this. And again, Pilate in the story itself says Jesus was innocent of that charge. So this seems inconsistent with Mr. Erhman's position to claim that it's the most certain, one of the most secure facts about Jesus, and then turn around and say, well, the man never even said this. The Gospels don't have Jesus even calling himself King of the Jews. So, Mr. Erhman, how then do you believe that it's certain that he was killed for that reason when you admit he never said that? Pilate agrees that he's innocent even when he asked him about that King of the Jews. Did he say he was King of the Jews? Jesus again says, my kingdom is not of this world. Pilate appears to understand that. He understands Jesus means that it's a spiritual thing or whatever. He accepts that and he says, I don't find any reason to charge this man. But Mr. Erhman says it's a secure fact of Jesus's history or story. It's very strange. So again, he admits it. King of the Jews is not a term Jesus ever uses of himself in the Gospels, and it is not a term ever used of him by any Christian author of the first century. So why is it the charge against him at the trial? So why is it the charge against him at the trial and the charge written on the placard at the crucifixion? And then that's where it stops, and this is where it tells you got to become a member to read the rest. But again, that alone to me is just like, you know, why would you take that as the certain fact based upon the charge when the charge is false? You admit he never said it. You admit early Christians of the first century never said it of him either. Yet you're saying this is why you believe that it's one of the most certain facts about Jesus. So this seems very confusing. Brother Wissam, what's your thoughts on that?
Precisely like yours, honestly. It seems like he has a kind of, I don't know, a toxic relationship with the New Testament, where he will believe it sometimes and completely disregard it in others. So what you just mentioned about the whole story about Barabbas, I mean, one blog post is not going to do justice to it. There are a lot of books written on that particular subject and different theories that have been put forward. So there are Christian theologians who've tried to kind of substantiate why Pilate would do this. The best they could come up with is that maybe Barabbas himself was wrongly imprisoned, and Pilate internally knew this. Like, I can post some sources for this as well. So like evangelical Christians, they've mulled this idea over too, trying to understand how is it possible that this bloodthirsty, very tyrannical, by the book, Roman figure would release an insurrectionist into the crowd. And so they theorized in their heads, without any evidence, that Barabbas was the one who was innocent. That he was actually, there was I kid you not, Shadid, that there was a third Jesus. There was a third Jesus, and that one was the insurrectionist. Although the Gospels literally say, in regards to the Barabbas that was present in the trial with the Messiah, Jesus, that he was an insurrectionist, and he was a robber, and he was a murderer. But they say no, they're just referring to the identity of a specific Barabbas. But there was a third Barabbas, Jesus Barabbas, who's actually an insurrectionist. But Pilate got this guy by accident, and he's just going to release them into the crowd because he knows that he's innocent. This is the depths that they have to go to. The text is clear. This man was, and in fact, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't read everything Bar Eamon has written, but I don't know if he's into source criticism as much as some others. But you can actually look at the Gospel of John alone and see that it is clearly addressing a need. And so, for example, while some of the theories with regards to how Jesus might have escaped are to do with I guess, the different heresies that were circulating at the time, were quote unquote heresy. Okay, so in the Gospel of Mark and Luke, okay, this Barabbas guy, he's called an insurrectionist, somebody who was raising up an army or some kind of effort against the Roman government, and a murderer. In the Gospel of John, Barabbas is described as lestes, which is a robber, a thief. Just one of the people that might have been hanging around in the temple when Jesus said, you've turned, a house of God into a den of thieves, the same word there in Greek, lestes. And so he minimizes Barabbas' actual. You'll see in your English translations. I don't know if there's any Christians in or Muslims if you're using a New Testament. Go to the English translation. Usually, they will say he was involved in an insurrection, or he was a murderer, trying to harmonize the message that is found within the Synoptics about who this Barabbas was. But John's author literally uses the word, and you can check the concordance, lestes, which is a robber, in order to get his readers to know, okay, if he releases a robber, that's okay, I guess. It's not an insurrectionist. Maybe Caesar will forgive him for this. Maybe he felt a little bit of pressure. But a person who is actually involved in murder and insurrection would never be released. Never. And look at just as a means to address the actual narrative. Not everything has to be done in a historical light, but look what they say. They say, if you release this Jesus, as in the real Jesus, the one who is completely innocent and hasn't done anything to deserve execution, you are no friend of Caesar's. You are no friend of... So they threaten him by invoking the name of Caesar. But think about it. Wallahi, think about it. What is more insulting to Caesar, to Augustus Caesar? What is more insulting? That you release a person who was raising up an army against your state and killed people, or releasing the person who you already acknowledged is completely innocent? I mean, the actual charge is so insane. The only way to substantiate this is that there were incredible controversies surrounding Isa alayhi salam's escape and his ascension, and so they tried to come up with ideas about how that could have happened. And so that's why you have these developments. That's why in the Gospel according to Mark, there is no mention of Jesus being crucified, by the way, at all in the Gospel according to Mark. Nothing. So from the time where it says, a certain man was compelled from the crowd, which is again another really hard to understand ahistorical incident. So they had just, finished beating this guy and whipping him and dressing him in a crown of thorns and dressing him in a purple robe, very Dionysian type of imagery, and slapping him, spitting at him, all this stuff. And then all of a sudden they feel sorry for him and just compel a guy from the crowd and say, here, you take his cross. And, because he's tired right now after all the beatings we've given him, which doesn't make any sense. So, but, this is how they portray that incident to have happened. And so that incident is already kind of weird. But when you see in the Gospel according to Mark, what is written on the actual cross, it says King of the Jews. It doesn't say Jesus, doesn't say who he was, or it just says King of the Jews. In the next Gospel, Matthew, it says here's Jesus, the King of the Jews. Okay, and in Luke, I think this is what it says in Luke, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And then you get to John, and he wants no doubt to show you that it is actually Jesus who's on the cross. Whereas Mark, it just says the King of Jews. It doesn't identify him. But in John it says, here is Jesus, the King of the Jews. And it's written in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. I don't know how thick these 2x4s were that he's being crucified with, even though it's stauros. It's not really, might not have been an actual cross, but whatever. But it's written in 3 different languages, so you get the idea that there is no doubt about who it is that's being crucified. Okay, so you have all of these developments, and then you have in all of the synoptics something strange, like an incident that is not really explained about certain ways that you could possibly see that are alluding to the escape of Isa alayhi salam. So again, one certain example is the Gospel according to Mark. I think it's in chapter 15, where during his arrest, during the arrest of Isa alayhi salam, he tells them, you've come to me with clubs and hammers or whatever, as if I am leading a rebellion, as if I am leading an insurrection. So he tells them straight up, that's not what I'm doing. But they try to apprehend him, and in the Gospel according to Mark, it says that there was a young man who was following him, and he was wearing nothing but a cloak over his body. And then the soldiers turned their attention to him, and they tried to grab him, but he escaped. And he ran away naked, it says. He had no clothes on, so which is already weird. The only pseudo reference that we have of this in early Christian literature is something called the Secret Gospel of Mark, and there is a debate over the authenticity of this passage, whether it's a forgery or not, because it was discovered relatively recently and the manuscript was disappeared. But there are scholars who say that it has a good chance of being authentic, and it describes this same young man as being one of the disciples of Isa alayhi salam, actually the beloved disciple, who he was training, who he put in a tomb for a long period of time, and then came to check to see if he was good, and then perhaps kind of prepping him for what's to come, taking the place of Jesus. So that's one thing, and it's never explained in the Gospel of Mark who this person was, why he was running around naked. Why you would even include that in your narrative without building on it is anyone's guess. Then you have the completely implausible concept that so how do you know that they didn't get the wrong Jesus? Oh, because there's a story where Judas Iscariot, he comes and he tells the Romans and the Jewish officials, whoever I kiss, that's the person who you should arrest. That's Jesus, because apparently they didn't recognize him. But if you read the actual accounts of everything that Jesus did, raising people to life, I know there was no Twitter, there was no Instagram, but word gets around when you're bringing people back to life left and right. Jairus' daughter, Lazarus, healing lepers, healing the paralytics, all of these incredible things that he did. Walking on water, stilling the storm, multitudes coming to him, following him for days, feeding of the 5,000. Feeding 5,000 people with just a few loaves and a few fish. Which is incredible. So word gets around, and he's doing this for years. Not to mention that he already has a reputation as a child of teaching in the synagogues and whatever miraculous things he was doing as a child. Because I'm sure he wasn't just, going to elementary school and going about his day as the Messiah, or as Christians say, the God incarnate. So word had to have gotten around. And so, but you still need Judas to come and kiss this person in order for you to identify him. That already makes no sense. So it is easily, it's possible, and it's easily imaginable that this particular incident was made to show that the gospel readers, hey, no, we didn't get the wrong guy. That's exactly who it was. So it's a polemic after polemic trying to substantiate why people thought this, and reasons to show you that you shouldn't think that. You shouldn't think it was actually Jesus who wasn't. It was somebody else who got crucified. And then then you have now this whole thing that Shadid was talking about, which is Jesus Barabbas. What are the odds that you're on trial and another person named Jesus Barabbas is on trial, who was calling himself the King of the Jews? And Barabbas literally means son of the Father. It's like a patronymic. So it's a name that's derived from son of the. So it's son of the Father. Barabbas in Aramaic. So was Jesus calling himself the son of the Father? Yes, he was. This other person's calling himself son of the Father. And it's easily, Pontius Pilate doesn't want him to be crucified, but he wants the other person to be crucified. He was accused of a federal crime, murder, insurrection, and you see that the last gospel is trying to, fudge the narrative, and it even removes Simon of Cyrene from the whole equation. It says Jesus bore his own cross to Golgotha. Jesus bore his own cross to Golgotha, and completely in opposition to what's found in the synoptics. So let me just read here from a book. I think it is by Cambridge, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, yeah. So this is from the Fourth Gospel in Research and Debate by Benjamin Bacon. And he's talking about the Gospel of John, and he says the author goes at least to the verge of self-contradiction in the hospitality toward both Gnostic and Jewish Christian conceptions. Some passages, as we have already seen, are demonstrably due to redactional revision. Among them, such particularly as come nearer the synoptic type. And it may be possible to show that instances like the correction of Mark in John 19:17 that Jesus bore his own cross was one of those instances. So I mean, and these are not Muslims. They're saying that this is clearly a redaction, because you can't really substantiate it any other way. And you have to get your mind into the mind of the author. Why is this redaction there? Why is John trying so? And again, we can go to Church Father citation and see why exactly he might have done this. But these were very early ideas, and the thing that we were trying to get Bart Ehrman to kind of engage with is the possibility that it might have been somebody else who was crucified. But what he says, again, is that the hallucination theory, that his disciples simply hallucinated after he was dead and thought that he was alive, is more probable than them actually seeing the real Jesus alive, even though he went to the trouble of disguising himself even after his resurrection. That's more plausible than that. And I think that's just absurd, just on the face of it.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, so you hope you guys are understanding what we're showing here. We're again, like I said, we definitely like his work when it comes to textual criticism, dealing with the manuscript. He's definitely on point with that. But when it comes to this, we just can't agree with him. And that's part of being an adult, where, you don't always agree 100% with a person. All right. We can say, well, look, most of the stuff he says about the textual criticism, the history of the Christians and all that, we can agree, but we don't agree 100%. So again, I'm saying that because I don't want in the future when we use it, because I'm still going to use his work when it comes to textual criticism and stuff like that. I don't want them to try to use that fallacy. Oh, you're using him on this, but look what he said about that. That's fine. We don't agree with him on this thing about the crucifixion, and we're providing evidence why. And like I said, from reading his material, I'm trying to figure out how he keeps making this statement that it's a certainty in history based upon the other things that he said, like we just demonstrated what Brother Wissam is showing. Hey, I'm going to show you some more. All right, let me show you some more to further say why we like. How is he saying that it's the most certain thing based upon the other things that he says, and his reliance upon the very documents, again, that he tells us are unreliable. He says it. You can see it. Go to his transcripts. Matter of fact, you can read his books, of course, misquoting Jesus, forged. You can read all his books. But, in his debate with Lane Craig, he says these are historically unreliable, yet he's basing his position about the crucifixion on these same. In other words, he's not going to anything outside. Like, I would expect him to perhaps say, hey, well, we have archaeology, we have documents from the Romans, something like that. But no, instead, he's basing this idea that the crucifixion of Jesus is certain back to the very documents that he teaches us, that he tells us in his books and his debates, his lectures, are historically unreliable. I can't figure this out. But let me show you again. Let me see. I'm putting it up on the screen. All right, so I'm showing you another blog. This one is Jesus Crucifixion as King of the Jews, if you want to look it up for yourselves and read along, right? So here's what he says. He says, one of the main reasons meaning him, Bart Ehrman, one of the main reasons that Erhman thinks Jesus called himself the future Messiah is that this best explains, again, he's saying it again, the best attested event of his entire life, his crucifixion by the Romans. So as you see, he keeps saying it. He keeps saying that it's the best attested event. It's the best secure fact and all this stuff. But then again, watch why we again say, is he really certain that it's the best attested? Because look what he says further, right? So he says, there are a few things we can say with virtual certainty about Jesus. For example, he was a Jewish preacher from the rural Galilee who made a fateful trip to Jerusalem and was crucified by the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. There are, of course, a lot of other things we can say without quite so much certainty, right? He gives a reference to the apocalyptic prophet, the New Millennium. That's a book, or that's one of his books, right? But that much is certain. So why did the Romans crucify him? And again, he's going to make the same charge that I read from the other one. That again, he's going back to this King of the Jews claim, which again, it's not. I don't understand how he keeps saying that that's the most certain thing. When again, we're going to show you, for those who are not familiar with the Bible, we're going to show you from the Christian scriptures itself that Pilate said Jesus was innocent of that charge. So I don't understand how Mr. Erhman is familiar with the history of Pilate. And again, he talks about that in another blog where he admits that Pilate was very brutal, very a dictator. He was very stern. He was very harsh. He was very, like he was like almost an immovable, brutal leader or ruler. And he wouldn't be easily moved by the Jews and what they wanted. Like basically he's telling us that he wouldn't care. And history attested us that Pilate didn't care what the hell the Jews thought. If he said whatever it is to be, it is to be. So the fact that he's going back to believe that the Romans actually killed an innocent man on trumped up charges, which Pilate said the man was innocent of. Mr. Erhman, if I could talk to you directly or do an interview, man, I would love to find out how you're still holding this position based upon what you say, again, in other parts of your blog. But let's read it. Because he says it right here in this one, too, which is strange. Look what he says further. Right? So he says, why did the Romans crucify him? The Romans had to have a reason to crucify a person. Again, Mr. Erhman, in the story that you said in this part you say is reliable, they didn't have a reason because Pilate said he was innocent. So, but let's read it again. He said Romans had to have a reason to crucify a person. There had to be a criminal charge. Again, Pilate says Jesus was innocent, though, of the criminal charge. So I don't get it. There could be lots of charges. Runaway slaves, brigands, insurrectionists, which Jesus Barabbas was. So again, this is another strange point. And again, in another blog, he admits that it is very unlikely that the Romans would have let go a person who was directly known as an insurrectionist, i.e. Jesus Barabbas. That is unlikely that he would have let him go and killed an innocent man and let this insurrectionist guy go back free into public, which would obviously give him the opportunity to continue his insurrectionist activities. And Bart Ehrman admits this, and we're going to show it to you. He admits this in another blog that he wrote. He admits this. This is unlikely they would have done this. Yet here he is trying to tell us he believes that this event, the charge against Jesus, is the most attested to thing in history. Yet in other places, he contradicts that by saying it's unlikely that they would have released a known insurrectionist, a known murderer, and killed an innocent man. Yet here he is telling us that very thing. Isn't that something? But let me read further. He says, where was that? Yeah, so they had reasons. They had to have a reason to kill a person, either a runaway slave, brigands, insurrectionists. All could be crucified. So why was Jesus crucified? The Gospels tell us, see what he's doing? He's not going back to archaeology. He's not going back to the Roman records of the Roman records that they had themselves. He's going back to the very Gospels, Mr. Erhman, that he tells us are historically, I'm going to keep saying this, that he told us are historically unreliable, yet he's going back to those very Gospels. It's very strange, very strange. So he says the Gospels tell us. Right? Again, I would expect him to say archaeology tells us. We found records in Roman, in the Roman temple or the ancient Roman city hall or the ancient Roman town hall or the ancient Roman courthouse. Records were found that speak of the trial of Jesus, something like that. Nope. What does he do? No, the Gospels tell us. Strange, very strange. The Gospels tell us. And in this particular case, there are very good reasons for thinking what they say is right. Jesus was crucified for calling himself King of the Jews. Again, remember in the other blog I read, he admitted Jesus never said that. He admitted it. He said Jesus in the Gospels never called himself king of the Jews. So Mr. Erhman, then why are you saying he was crucified for that reason when you know he didn't say that? You tell us and admit he never said that. Obviously the Gospels demonstrate he never said that. You tell us that the Christians of the, if I remember correctly, the first century never said that. Yet you believe that this is the most attested to thing in history, that he was killed for that reason. When in the story itself, Pilate says he was innocent of calling himself king of the Jews. So this is very weird. But he says it. Jesus was crucified for calling himself king of the Jews. Right? Very strange. So he goes on to say, there are several points to make that, taken all together, suggest this is historically what actually happened. Again, relying on the Gospels that you keep telling us, Mr. Erhman, are historically unreliable. I'm going to keep saying it. Suggest that this is historically what actually happened. First, all the Gospels, again, that you told us are historically unreliable. First, all the Gospels agree that Jesus' trial, that at Jesus' trial, this is what Pontius Pilate accused Jesus of, based on what the governor had learned from the Jewish authorities. Second, this is the charge that is written against Jesus on the placard over his head on the cross. Again, in all our accounts. Yeah, in all the accounts that you told us, Mr. Erhman, are historically unreliable. That you told us were not written by eyewitnesses. That you told us were written 30, 40, 50, 60 years later or more by people who were not eyewitnesses. By, as you told us, by literate Greeks or highly trained Greek speaking Christians of centuries, later, not by Jesus' illiterate disciples. This is what you said, sir. I got the transcript from your debate with Mr. Craig, where those are your words right there. That's what you told us. And now you're relying on them to claim that this event is historically accurate, is historically certain. But again, I asked, that's why we made this show today. Are you really certain of that based upon the other things that you have told us? I find that very weird, very weird. So again, he says, so those 2 points are suggestive, but not in themselves convincing. 2 other points show why, again, he keeps going to the Gospels. 2 other points show why the Gospels are historically correct about this. But again, how could you say that? How could you even know when, again, the other things you told us about these very books being historically unreliable, written not by eyewitnesses, but people living decades later, centuries later, whatever, right? You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to make sense of this. So he says the first is that there is nothing up to this point in the Gospels that would lead either anyone in the narrative itself or anyone reading the narrative to expect that this will be the charge leveled against Jesus. Once again, look what he tells us. This is Bart Erhman speaking in the blog. You can see it on the screen if you're on YouTube. He says again, nowhere in the Gospels does Jesus preach he is the present or future king of the Jews. This is Bart Erhman admitting Jesus never said this. And again, the Gospels prove that Pilate investigates and finds out it's correct. Jesus doesn't say that. He's not guilty of that. And we'll demonstrate that, right? So he says, nowhere in the Gospels does Jesus preach he is the present or future king of the Jews. He does not enrage his enemies by calling himself the king of the Jews. He never so much as mentioned to anyone that he is the king of the Jews. So I don't understand why you would believe that was the charge against him, Mr. Erhman. And of course, I know you got to be familiar with the story. Again, I know I'm sorry, brothers and sisters, to repeat myself, but I'm just finding this astounding that he admits that point. I know he's familiar with the story where Pilate says Jesus was innocent of that charge. He's innocent of that. He's innocent of the king of the Jews charge. And we'll show you. We're going to show you, for those who are not familiar with the Gospels, we'll show you where the story actually takes place and where it is. And he asks, Pilate in the story asked him about that exact question. Are you king of the Jews? Jesus shows that he's not. Pilate agrees that Jesus is not and doesn't claim to be. He says, I have no reason to charge this man. So, Mr. Erhman, how would you think this is historically certain? This is amazing. All right. So again, he goes on to say, he never so much as mentions to anyone that he is the king of the Jews. The charge at the trial comes almost completely out of the blue. It is the one thing Pilate asked Jesus, and there is nothing that ever happens in the gospel prior to that point that would make you think that it will be the charge. And so it is not a charge made up by the gospel writers to conform the account of the trial to the rest of their narrative, right? At a final point is even more interesting and compelling. The title King of the Jews is not a title Christians used, so far as we can tell, for Jesus. That really matters for this question. So he says, here is why. Right? He says Christians were frequently making up stories about Jesus. Why can't this be made up as well? That's me saying. Christians were frequently making up stories about Jesus in order to have him say and do what Christians wanted him to say and do. No one really doubts this, even conservative Bible-believing Christians, because we have gospels from outside the New Testament that are chock full of stories about Jesus that no one on the planet thinks are historically accurate, but that portray Jesus. By the way, you said that the ones that we got now are not historically accurate. So again, those are your words. You said the ones that we got now are not historically accurate, let alone the ones that are outside of it, Mr. Erhman, right? He says no one on the planet thinks are historically accurate, but that portray Jesus in ways that people wanted to portray him. And also we have later gospels like the infancy gospel of Thomas. This is the one brother Wissam mentioned, that shows Jesus with amazing miraculous powers as a 5-year-old son of God. Yes, he seems a bit mischievous, but the point is he was astoundingly powerful, something Christians would want to emphasize. We have gospels like the Gospel of Peter that narrate the fantastic account of Jesus emerging from his tomb on the morning of the resurrection, tall as a mountain, with a walking, talking cross behind him. We have Gnostic gospels where Jesus delivers mysterious, secretive teachings that, lo and behold, sound very much like what Gnostics believe themselves, and so on. Someone is making these things up. Again, why not the gospels that we have right now? Why can't those be made up as well? And again, based upon the other things that he says in his blog, it's like he's kind of saying that they're made up too. But in this point, again, he claims that this part is supposedly historically accurate. Right? I just can't, you know what I mean? Like I said, I just can't get it. Right? So let's go a little further. Right? He says, when Christians made up stories about Jesus, said and did, in order to show that Jesus was who Christians were saying he was, it is a striking fact that so far as we can know, Christians were not going around proclaiming Jesus by using the title King of the Jews. They used a lot of other titles for him: Lord, Savior, Son of Man, Son of God, God, and so on. So when these titles are used of him in the Gospels, you're never really sure. Right? Wait, he says you're never really sure. Is this something that's historical, or is this something that has been read back into Jesus' life by later followers who wanted to portray him in certain ways? But Christians, at least in our surviving text, for example, the Gospels, Acts, Paul's letters, again, everything that he tells us are forgeries, unreliable, not by eyewitnesses, right? Everything. This is amazing. And other writings of the New Testament do not speak of him as the King of the Jews. Then why do all the accounts of his trial indicate he was condemned for saying just that? Probably because really was. Okay, that must be a typo. Probably because really was, I guess he wanted to say, probably because he really was put on trial for saying that. But again, Mr. Erhman, how are you saying that when you admit he never said it in none of the Gospels? See, this is what I find wrong. So you're saying they all consistent on claiming that he was charged with that charge. Therefore, you believe that that charge is true and that's what really happened. Yet they're also consistent as you admit that he never said he was King of the Jews, and none of them. You admit that they were consistent that he never said that out of his mouth anywhere. He didn't say it in secret. He didn't say it out loud. So I'm trying to figure out how you're reconciling your position with both between these two. You admit that they're also consistent that he never said it out of his mouth in public or in secret. But then you're going with the consistency that they all consistently say he was charged with it. Why not take the other position that, well, this is questionable because he never said it, and they're all consistent that he never said it. They don't show him saying himself to be King of the Jews anywhere, right? So this is again, that's why we're asking the question, is he really certain? Is Mr. Erhman really certain of the crucifixion of Jesus based upon the other things that he believes and states about the very documents that he's going back? Again, you heard him. He's going back to the Gospels to claim that this particular incident is true based on the Gospels. Again, not based on archaeology, not based on, some type of documents that the Romans themselves had outside of the Bible. Nope. He's saying he's relying that it's reliable based upon the Gospels. The Gospels that he told us, that he tells us are unreliable themselves. This is very, very interesting, right? But let's continue a little further. He says, if that was the charge against Jesus, why didn't he simply deny the charge and get off the hook? Well, he does, Mr. Erhman. You know that. He does deny the charge. I don't get. Well, all right, let's keep going. Well, he couldn't get off the hook if, in fact, he did call himself the King of the Jews. So maybe he did. See that? You see how inconsistent this is? What do you mean maybe he did when you admit none of the Gospels show that he did that? Why would they leave that out? See, and that's the point that I would ask him. Why are you saying maybe he did, yet none of the Gospels, you admit none of the Gospels say that he did? So why would you take it that, and why would they leave that out? Like if he did that, that would be the perfect evidence for the Christians to say, look, see, he was charged, he was guilty of sedition, he was guilty of calling himself King of the Jews, which made the Romans upset with him and had to execute him, right? Why would they leave that out, Mr. Erhman? Why would all the Gospels forget to mention that Jesus called himself King of the Jews? But you admit none of them say that. You admit none of the Gospels. You admit the book of Acts, Paul, you admit all of these people, writers, never say he was King of the Jews. Yet here you are saying maybe he did say that. Based on what, Mr. Erhman? Based on what? What do you mean maybe he did? Based on what? Again, and with your own words, he never said it. Christians of the first century never said it. Acts, Paul's letters never say he said that about himself, nor do they call him that either. But here you are, maybe he did say that. I'm sorry, Mr. Erhman, but we can't. I mean, again, I love your work on other things, but this I just can't. I can't go along with you. And for those Christians who like to use Mr. Erhman's work in this particular argument against Muslims, well, Mr. Erhman says that it's the most certain thing in history. Yeah, you're right. He does say that. He does say that. But when you examine, as we're doing right now, his other writings and his other words, you wonder, is he really certain that it's the most certain thing in history? Is it really a secure fact of Jesus' life based upon what he tells us in these other places concerning these very events, right? So he goes on to say, but if he did, how did Pilate find out about it? Jesus does not call him. Look, he says it again. Jesus does not call himself this publicly in the Gospels. So if he was calling himself that in privately, how would Pilate know? Someone must have spilled the beans. Someone must have betrayed his private teachings. That would have been an insider. Guess who? And again, this is where it ends, and you got to become a member to read the rest of it, right? He says he'll follow up with it on the next post, whatever. But again, he already admits nobody in the Gospels say this. And as far as I'm aware, there is no one who says that he secretly called himself King of the Jews, right? So before I continue, brother Wissam, to show them where the Gospels talk about this event, and Pilate explicitly says Jesus is innocent of those charges, would you like to comment on what we just talked about just now?
No, I mean, everything you said was pretty clear. Not too much that I can build from it. It's just, it seems like he's working from the premise that Jesus was crucified, and he's just using what he has to work with, meaning whatever corroborated, biblically corroborated fact that he can surmise, and then say, okay, this must have been. But you're right, it's inconceivable. How are you saying that he wasn't calling himself the King of the Jews, at all, and then saying that that's what he eventually got crucified for? But now it appears that he's saying that somebody must have spilled the beans. So it's most likely he's going to be talking about Judas, which there are a lot of issues with that as well. But how do you know that that's really historically reliable? When you call into question everything else that's in the New Testament. And the first gospel has 12 forged verses about resurrection appearances. 12 forged verses. And then you have the later gospels. He is a proponent of the synoptic problem of mark and priority. He admits quite plainly that Matthew altered Mark, Luke altered Mark and added their own details, added their own resurrection appearances, and John did the same thing with the synoptics to an even higher degree, like we've demonstrated, with accounts related to the crucifixion and the resurrection. But you're going to take the actual story about Judas as now being reliable. It's just a bigger hole now. It doesn't make any sense, really. And that's how. So you're using something that you've called dubious. You've never said that the Gospels are the most historically reliable things on the face of the earth, but you're using them to substantiate a tangential aspect of Jesus' ministry, let alone his entire existence. You're using that to substantiate the crucifixion. Somebody make it make sense.
Yeah, exactly, brother. Exactly. All right, so here's what we're going to do. So now what we'll do is let's take you to the, the Gospels that he's relying on now. He told us they're unreliable, but he's relying on them now for some reason. But all right, so let's go to the very Gospels and let's see. Let's go to the very event where that is in question, where Jesus is being charged with these charges. He speaks to Pilate, and like I said, we're going to show you where the King of the Jews thing comes up. But you'll see how Pilate says Jesus is innocent. His investigation shows Jesus is innocent of the charge. All right. So let's go ahead and read that. We'll go to Luke chapter 23, verse 2. Okay, we'll start at Luke chapter 23. Those of you who are on YouTube, you can follow us here. For those on Clubhouse, just take notes or open up your YouTube, Mr. Islam Answers Back, and you can follow along from there. Or just if you got your Bible handy, pick it up. We're at Luke chapter 23, verse 2. So here's what it says. Okay, make sure it's on the screen here. Okay, yeah, there it is. All right. Okay, so it says, Luke chapter 23, verse 2. And they began to accuse him, i.e. Jesus, saying, we found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar. That's a lie, of course. He said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar and render unto God what is God. So they lying about that. And claims to be Messiah, a king. Okay, all right, that's what they say. But now Pilate obviously is going to investigate. Verse 3. So Pilate asked Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus' response, you have said so. Notice he doesn't say, yes, I am, or nope. He says, you have said so, Jesus replied. Okay. Verse 4. Then Pilate announced to the chief priest, look at it, it's very interesting. Look. Then Pilate announced to the chief priest and the crowd, I find no basis for a charge against this man. So, Mr. Erhman, I know you're familiar with it. You're an expert on this field. So again, I'm trying to figure out how you're trying to say that you believe that the charge and the execution based on that charge is historically accurate, when, as far as I'm aware, all the Gospels that speak of this event all show Pilate saying Jesus was innocent, right? They all say that, as far as I'm aware. They all say at this event, he's innocent. In one way or another, Pilate comes to the conclusion that Jesus is innocent of the charge. So as you see in Luke chapter 23, verse 4, Pilate announced to the chief priest and the crowd, I find no basis. So you heard it, right? Y'all saw that. He clearly asked him, are you the king of the Jews? If Jesus would have said yes, he obviously could have been found guilty of sedition or insurrection, and could have been charged. Oh, you're going against the Roman authorities. You're not a king. You're trying to be a king of our subjects. We'll take you out. But what does Pilate say in verse 4? Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, I find no basis for a charge against this man. Okay. Now, why is he further killed? Let's read. And by the way, when you read in Luke 2, Pilate sends him over to King Herod, which is the Jewish king at the time, allegedly. And he also finds that Jesus is innocent. So you got two rulers saying this man is innocent. So Herod sends him back. Says, well, I don't find none. He sends him back to Pilate, at least in the version of Luke that Luke has, right? But let's continue. Luke chapter 23, verse 5. But they insisted. He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here. Okay. Verse 6. On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was Galilean. Right? And this is the part what I'm talking about. He then finally sends him over to Herod. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at the time. Okay, and then as we go through, you'll see that Herod also says that Jesus was he was innocent. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased, because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there vehemently accusing him. Verse 11, then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him, dressing him in an elegant robe. They sent him back to Pilate. So they could, they didn't charge him with anything, right? That day Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this day they had been enemies. Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them, you brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. Here it goes, everybody. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him, Mr. Erhman. Pilate in all the stories says he finds no basis to charge him. So why do you believe, based on these same gospels, that he supposedly was actually charged for that and executed for that charge, when all of them are consistent that Pilate says he was innocent? And by your own admission in your Pilate and Barabbas blog, which we're going to show that as well, right? And in your Are the Gospels Right? Did Pilate really release a prisoner at Passover blog, you acknowledge in both of those blogs that that's highly unlikely that Pilate would have done that. You acknowledge that Pilate was very brutal and stern, and he didn't really care what the Jews thought. He didn't care about their traditions. He didn't care about none of that. So that it's highly unlikely that they would have actually released Barabbas, an actual insurrectionist, an actual murderer. You admit yourself in the blog that they killed those people. They definitely are not going to let that guy go free, no matter what the Jews wanted. But yet here you are in your other blogs telling us that you believe it's the most certain fact in history that Jesus was crucified by the Romans. But yet in other places you seem to contradict that by what you say, that it's highly unlikely they would have released a actual murderer, an actual insurrectionist, and killed an innocent man. You pretty much acknowledge that in the blog, and I'm showing it on the screen right now. It says, are the Gospels right? Did Pilate really release a prisoner at the Passover? He acknowledges that, this seems to be ahistorical, that it didn't happen in history. There's no record of Pilate ever doing such things. And that Pilate was known as a brutal dictator, etc. He ruled with an iron fist. He was quick to release his anger upon the Jews. He was quick to send his soldiers as thugs on the Jews for whatever they did that he didn't like. Yet Mr. Erhman is in other blogs telling us that it's a certain fact that Jesus was crucified by the Romans, when he was clearly declared innocent, as you see in the Gospels, that in one sentence, in other places he tells us are unreliable, but now he wants to say they're reliable when it comes to the crucifixion. But yet he appears to be ignoring that in the story. Pilate, notice he says it more than one time. After he said he was innocent first, he sends him to Herod. Herod sends him back, and then Pilate says it again in verse 14. He reiterates again. After Jesus is sent back from Herod, Pilate again, I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. What were the charges? King of the Jews. He's teaching about, don't pay the taxes and all of that. Pilate says, I find no basis against him to charge him. Right? Neither, and then verse 15. Verse 15, neither has Herod. So Herod said he was innocent too, for he sent him back to us, as you can see. He has done nothing to deserve death. Okay, therefore I will punish him and release him. Verse 16. Okay, and of course they don't want to do that. And this is where it gets into the other stuff about the crowd and, stirring up, and he wants to release him. He gives them the choice, etc. Right? He gives them the choice. They choose Barabbas instead of Jesus. But again, Mr. Erhman in his other blog says that's unlikely that the Romans would have released Barabbas, who was known to be an actual murderer, an actual guilty insurrectionist. It's unlikely. But again, look how inconsistent Mr. Erhman is by saying he believes that Jesus was actually killed for those charges, when Pilate says he was innocent of those charges. It's very strange. And again, in the story, Pilate doesn't kill Jesus for those charges. He only executes him because the crowd wanted him to. So he's not guilty. Pilate doesn't say he's guilty of King of the Jews. And the sign that they put, that was like as a mockery. They put that over him to mock him. But Pilate is clear that he's not killing Jesus because he's guilty. He's only killing him because that's what the crowd wanted him to do. And Mr. Erhman admits that this releasing of an actual guilty person to kill an innocent person is not historically accurate. But yet again, he's telling us that he believes the crucifixion by the Romans is historically accurate. But Mr. Erhman, it's based upon the fact that Pilate executes him on something that you told us is highly not historical. This is amazing. Let's go to the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John tells us the same thing, right? Where he's being brought. This is John chapter 18, verse 33, right? So it says, Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, the claim that Bart Ehrman claims that Jesus was killed for. Are you the king of the Jews? Verse 34. Is that your own idea? Jesus asked. Or did others talk to you about me? Right? Verse 35. Am I a Jew? Pilate replied. Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done? Verse 36, John chapter 18. Jesus said, here he says it, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. Verse 37. You are a king then? You are a king then? Replied Pilate said. Jesus answered, you say that I am. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Verse 38. What is truth? Retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered. And what does he say? Notice he doesn't say Jesus is guilty of King of the Jews. Remember, they were talking. That was the whole discussion. King of the Jews. Are you a king then? That's what you say. Jesus said. He doesn't say that I am. Although in one of the other gospels, I think he does say, oh no, he says about the Son of Man thing. But here he says, that's what you say. You say that I am. So what's Pilate's response? Does Pilate say, oh, yep, he's guilty. What does he say? Nope. Verse 38. What is truth? Pilate retorted. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. The New Living Translation. He is not guilty of any crime. He is not. Pilate. This is Pilate, the man that Mr. Erhman is telling us executed Jesus for the charge of King of the Jews, based upon the Gospels that he tells us over and over again in many of his books are historically unreliable. But he wants us to believe that now, for this particular instance, it's reliable. Yet, on the charge that he's saying he believes it's reliable, the story says, Pilate says Jesus was innocent of that charge. And they're all consistent. I'm going to use his standard. They're all consistent that Pilate said he was innocent of the charge of being king of the Jews. So, Mr. Erhman, why then would the Romans execute him on a charge that the governor said he was innocent of? Right? So you say he got killed for that reason, and that's the reason why you believe it's historical. Yet the story itself that you're relying upon says that he was innocent of that charge. And the story goes on to say that the only reason Pilate killed him was because the crowd wanted it, and he allegedly released an actual guilty person, which you admit in your other blog that they wouldn't have done that's not historical. Yet it involves Jesus being executed on something that you admit was not historical, the releasing of an actual insurrectionist to kill an innocent man. So, I mean, y'all see this, right? The whole thing is just inconsistent. And that's why we are doing this today, asking, is Mr. Erhman, is Professor Erhman, is he really certain that the crucifixion of Jesus is historical and certain based upon these things that he says in other places? And based upon the story itself that he's relying on, so we're going to go to it as well. And the story itself says that No, the man in question, the man who had the ability to sentence him, says he was innocent, right? He says he was innocent, man. Okay, brother. Yeah, I got you. There you go. Right? He says he's innocent. So right. So he says in verse again, John 18:38. I find no basis for a charge against him. I like the way the New Living Translation finds it. He is not guilty of any crime. That's what the New Living Translation says. He is not guilty. Pilate said he is not guilty of any crime. Now here's where it goes on, verse 39. Here's the part where Mr. Erhman admits, and we're going to show you that in a moment, that this part he believes is not historical. So if he believes this is not historical, then how does he believe Jesus actually got killed? Right? He goes on, verse 39, but it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews? Obviously, he's being sarcastic. Right? So they say, verse 40, not this man, they shouted, but Barabbas. Now, look what it even says it in the gospel. It's in parentheses, they put it, I think. Or, well, I don't know. It depends. Some put it in parentheses. Some put it as part of the text.
In the text.
It's in the text? Okay.
Never.
So yeah, so it says here they shouted back, no, not him, give us Barabbas. Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising, so it says that he actually took part, basically asserting that his guilt is certain. He was definitely an insurrectionist, right? So yeah, go ahead.
Translation. The actual mistranslation. The John is downplaying Barabbas's actual crime. The Greek word there is used a thief or a robber, not an insurrectionist.
Oh, okay, so they mistranslated it there.
Yep, to harmonize it with the others, because the others call him an actual murderer and an insurrectionist, whereas the Gospel of John just calls him a thief.
Okay. So it's like, I see what you're saying. So in other words, to try to like downplay his, so in other words, to make it easier to be released, right? I guess.
Exactly. Engaging with the actual controversy and saying, "Oh, this is why Barabbas was released." He was only a robber. He was only a thief. He was not really an insurrectionist. Whereas the synoptics are uniform in saying that he was he took part in an uprising against.
Okay. Well, yeah. See that? There you go, brothers and sisters. Another reason that shows you the unreliability, the corruption of the story. That the others clearly show he was an insurrectionist, which would then bring into question why would they release an actual insurrectionist? But so as the brother pointed out, John lowers him to just being like a robber. So well, he's not. He's just a robber. So he's not an actual insurrectionist, right? So it'd be easier to release him. That would reconcile that problem. All right, so and then it goes to John 19, and then it says Pilate then took Jesus, had him flogged, and then you guys know the rest of the story. But again, as we pointed out, that Mr. Erhman says that this particular incident is not reliable. So let's go to it right now. Y'all can see that on the screen. This is, are the Gospels right? Did Pilate release a prisoner at the Passover? Okay. So Mr. Erhman says, what is this? He talks about the number of the post. He says, often I deal with issues in the New Testament that in my judgment cannot be historically accurate. One of these, to the surprise of many readers, is the familiar story of what allegedly happened at the trial of Jesus according to the Gospels. Pilate is said to have offered to release him as a favor to the Jewish crowds gathered in Jerusalem for Passover, but instead they choose a Jewish insurrectionist and murderer, Barabbas, and so that was the one Pilate released. Could that have happened? Okay, so he's pulling at the question. All right, so he says the question. Pilate condemns Jesus to execution for treason against Rome, but he doesn't. What the hell? He doesn't though, Mr. Erhman. The story shows that he doesn't. He says Jesus is innocent, and he only kills him because the crowd wanted to. Why is he saying that? Oh no, I'm sorry. Oh, maybe that's the questioner. Maybe the questioner is saying that. Okay, Pilate condemns Jesus to execution for treason against Rome. Okay, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe that's the questioner to Mr. Erhman. Maybe that's not what Mr. Erhman is saying. All right, Pilate gives the Jewish crowds the option of releasing Jesus or a Jewish insurgent, Barabbas. All right, or Barabbas. I did a yeah. Okay, my bad. That's the questioner who's saying it, not Mr. Erhman. Okay, I did a quick search to see if this was an attested practice in the Roman Empire and couldn't find any relevant information. So I have two questions. Do you think this detail is accurate? Is there any evidence that the Roman officials actually freed condemned prisoners at certain local festivals? His response: there was an issue I worked on while writing my book, Jesus Before the Gospels. After doing my research, I came to a definite conclusion that I state rather strongly. Here is what I have to say about the matter. The matter there. Mark's gospel indicates that this was Pilate's custom to release a prisoner guilty of a capital crime to the Jewish crowd in honor of the Passover festival. He asked if they would like him to release Jesus, but they urged him to release for them Barabbas or Barabbas instead, a man in prison for committing murder during an insurrection. Pilate appears to feel that his hand is forced, and so he sets Barabbas free, but orders Jesus to be crucified. He gives the reference of Mark chapter 15, verse 6. This Barabbas episode was firmly set in the early Christian memory of Jesus' trial. It is found with variations in all four of the Gospels. I do not see how it can be historically right. However, it appears to be a distorted memory. So you heard what he said. He says, I do not see how it can be historically right. However, it appears to be a distorted memory. But again, this event is directly connected to the charge of King of the Jews, which Pilate says Jesus was innocent of. So I'm trying to figure out how you were able to separate those two, Mr. Erhman, when they're directly connected. Like it goes right from the King of the Jews thing and him saying that Jesus is innocent right to the release of the prisoner for the Passover thing. So how are you disconnecting the King of the Jews charge and saying you feel that that is the most attested to thing in history, yet it is directly connected to the release of Barabbas, which you say cannot be historically right? So again, everybody, I hope y'all can see the argument that we're building. Does Mr. Erhman really feel that the crucifixion of Jesus is a most certain thing in history based upon what he's saying in other parts, sometimes in the very same blog? Like, it's like, whoa, you're saying the same thing in the blog that you're writing about the event, right? So he goes on to say this. He says, for starters, what evidence is there that Pilate ever released a prisoner to the Jewish crowd because they wanted him to do so, or because he wanted to behave kindly toward them during their festival? Apart from the Gospels, there is none at all. Let me read that again. Apart from the Gospels, there is none at all. I.e., there's no evidence that Pilate ever did this outside of the Gospels. Okay, so if that's the case, Mr. Erhman, once again, how are you claiming that the execution of Jesus, based on the charge of him being King of the Jews, which Pilate did not charge him with, he said he was innocent of that crime, and he only allegedly kills him because the crowd didn't want to accept the release of Jesus. They accepted the release of Barabbas, rather, which you say right here, there's no evidence that this ever happened. You admit that it's highly unlikely that they would release an actual murderer, insurrectionist, and kill an innocent man. Yet here you are telling us that you believe that the most certain fact is that Jesus was crucified by the Romans. And you appeal to the Gospels to say that. Yet in the very Gospels you appeal to, which you've told us are unreliable, but okay, you accept it for this story, but yet the story that you accept says that Pilate said he was innocent of that charge. This is like, wow. So he goes on to say, again, there's no evidence that they've done this at all. In part, that is because we do not have a huge number of sources for the governorship of Pilate over Judea. Just some highly negative remarks in the writings of a Jewish intellectual of his day, Philo of Alexandria, and a couple of stories in the writings of the Jewish historian Josephus. These are enough, though, to show us the basic character of Pilate, his attitude to the Jews that he ruled, and his basic approach to Jewish sensitivities. The short story is that he was a brutal, ruthless ruler with no concerns at all for what the people he governed thought about him or his policies. He was violent, mean-spirited, and hard-headed. He used his soldiers as thugs to beat the people into submission, and he ruled Judea with an iron fist. Mr. Erhman, based on what you're saying here, how then do you want to tell us that it is a most certain or secure fact of history that Pilate killed Jesus when in the story he said Jesus was innocent, and he went to the crowd and to the chief high priest and told them, I have no reason to charge this man. The man does not deserve death. The man is not guilty of any crime. And you want us to believe, based on what you just said, that he was influenced by the Jewish crowd to still go ahead and release a murderer, a guilty insurrectionist, and kill an innocent man who he told them more than one time that I said this man was innocent. And you want us to believe, based on what you just told us, and which we agree, because I researched it. We agree that Pilate was that type of man. Yet you want us to believe that a man who didn't care what the Jews thought about him or his policies still went ahead and killed a man that he told them more than once was innocent. Yet you want us to believe that that's the most secure fact in history, that Jesus got killed by the Romans on the charge of King of the Jews, when Pilate in the story says he wasn't guilty of being King of the Jews and wanted to release him. Mr. Erhman, man, if this gets back to you and you'd be willing to talk to us, we would definitely love to question you on this. But for now, we're not making this up. We're using his own words and his own blogs for everybody to see it. Christians, Jews, Muslims, atheists, you can all see it right here. That it's clear that we cannot conclude from these things that Mr. Erhman is certain about the crucifixion. I don't see how he can be. Perhaps, and this is my opinion, perhaps he's just saying it. Maybe he doesn't want to be considered to be too far left or too far out there. But when you read, as we're demonstrating to you, brothers and sisters, we're reading to you his own words. When you hear this, do you conclude that do you see how he possibly could claim that the crucifixion is the most certain thing based upon what he's saying in other blogs that are connected to the same topic? I mean, again, we're not trying to be, we're not trying to be mocking of the professor or anything, but I really cannot see. I'm trying to be objective as possible, without any bias, to really see why is he saying it's the most certain thing. Yet he's saying these other things that would lead me to believe this stuff is not certain in history. The execution is not certain. The charge of King of the Jews is obviously not certain, because the story says he was innocent of that. So I'm really trying to figure this out, Mr. Erhman. I really am. Mr. Brother Wissam, what's your thoughts on that, bro?
The same thing. I'm in perfect agreement with you. It's really it's inconceivable. Among other things that we've discussed with regards to the obvious kind of developments within the Gospels, as you just said, with regards to the story of Barabbas, with regards to Pontius Pilate's character and what happened during the trial, none of it makes sense if you were to assume that he just allowed a prisoner to be removed. There's a story about Pontius Pilate in the Antiquities of the Jews, in the Jewish War, and something similar, although with a few different details, are mentioned by Philo of Alexandria, which he just mentioned. And so, if I remember correctly, Pilate brought some statues to Judea when he was first introduced, to show the Jews that they were they were going to submit to the emperor by any means. So he brought, and they don't want statues around where they lived. So he brought busts of Caesar and statues and ornaments and everything. And the legend has it, who knows if this is accurate or not, but this is what Josephus says, that they prostrated at his door for 5 days. These Jews who are screaming, "Give us Jesus! We want Jesus! You're not a friend of Caesar if you don't give us Jesus!" He's so scared and says, "I find nothing wrong with this man. Okay, here you go. Take the insurrectionist." They were prostrating at his door for 5 days. 5 days, and refused to get up, saying, making sujood to him for 5 whole days, saying, "Please remove these, because it's against our law." And he wouldn't do it. When they persisted, he surrounded them with an army and they were going to behead every single one. And when he saw that they were like dedicated, and he didn't want to kill all of them because they were all ready to die. Of course, he wanted them to be taxed and stuff like that. He then said, we'll remove the busts. He didn't placate to them right away. He was ready to kill every single one of them. And the initial thing of him bringing the busts was his idea to show them that he's going to rule them with an iron fist. So this whole story about sending back an insurrectionist and a murderer or a thief, as John puts it, is just crazy. It's crazy. It doesn't fit with anything that we know from these accounts.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Somebody on the YouTube chat says speaking of Erhman, he says he accepts the crucifixion because that's what the surviving evidence suggests. That's how history works. And Jesus was condemned as a rebel, and Romans crucified rebels all the time. AB, we just proved that he wasn't condemned as a rebel. Pilate says he wasn't guilty of that. He says he was innocent. Again, the story says the only reason Pilate kills him is because of this supposed choice to free one person a year, which Mr. Erhman, as I just read to you, says that appears to be not historically right, not historically accurate, not true at all. So that's the only reason he was killed, AB. He wasn't condemned as a rebel. Pilate said he was innocent. Yeah, go ahead.
About this privately, but for sure, when Reza Aslan's book came out, Zealot, which tried to portray Isa alayhi salam as an insurrectionist, as an army leader, as a leader of a rebellion, and a true worldly enthroned king. Bart Ehrman criticized it and lambasted it, saying, "No, this is not historical. This is not how Jesus was operating." We have, so he couldn't have been really incriminated because of that. And again, it just seems like, and I think any reasonable person would say, seems like they are all operating under a way to substantiate what was going on. Like, why were his disciples shocked to see him the next day when he should have been preaching his resurrection the whole time? Did they get amnesia? Well, this is like the atmosphere of those gospels. Why were they shocked? Why were they utterly scared? They saw a ghost when they're supposed to expect this. Why are they? It's because they had no understanding, and then he had to unlock their minds superficially. Why is there something about Jesus, escaping, and this person, Jesus Barabbas, who was an insurrectionist? How can that possibly be? Oh, no, now. John demotes him to a common thief. What about Simon of Cyrene and all of these Basilidians and the people who Polycarp is accusing of rejecting the crucifixion, or who Paul is maybe talking about in Galatians, saying that, "Don't you foolish Galatians, don't you see that that Jesus was portrayed as crucified before you?" And many scholars are saying that that's the person Corinthus. There are scholarly sources for that too. Why is that going on? Oh, John gets rid of that as well. John gets rid of Simon of Cyrene and says, no, he wasn't there. Jesus bore his own cross. Did he swoon? Of course not. He got. They saw that he was dead, and then they stabbed him with a spear. So many things that just seem like they're implausible. Well, how is it that they didn't recognize him? And Judas has to come and give him a kiss on the forehead, or wherever the kiss was, in order for the Jewish leaders to arrest him. Why is it that the disciples were defending him all the way up until his crucifixion? Why is it that he prayed? Of course, the Gospel of John gets rid of that too. My heart is grieved. What shall I say? Save me from this hour, like he said in the Synoptics. No, it was for this hour that I came. It's just embellishment after embellishment after embellishment. And then when you look at the actual status of extra biblical evidence for his crucifixion, it's completely non-existent. Where we have, like I mentioned to Bart Ehrman in our correspondence, multiple sources that either outright deny it or claim to be a composition of his teachings that don't mention it at all. And that has to be substantiated. And the very least, the Muslim claim is that it is doubtful. And I don't think anyone who does not have a vested interest or a political interest or a monetary interest can ever say that it is certain. And to be honest, to be completely academically honest, it is not even certain outside of belief, outside of actual belief in God and the Quran, it is not certain that Jesus existed. There's just no evidence. There's not enough evidence that he ever existed. If all we have are these documents that are full of redactions and are too late to even consider to be authoritative. So how can you, if you're in doubt about the actual existence of the man, how could you not be in doubt about particular aspects of his life?
Yeah, brother. Yeah, it's all of the evidence, is there to show that it's just not. It's not reliable, man, as he claims. I saw in the comment section that Mike, which would a lot of these people do. They will give us, they will appeal to authority. So and so says it's the most thing. So and so says so and so. But notice nobody provides evidence. None of the people that Mike is quoting, in the back provides evidence. All they have is statements, just like Mr. Erhman. It's the most attested to thing. It's the most attested to thing in history. It's the most certain thing. It's the most secure fact. But then when you examine what he says, it's like, well, okay, how is it a certain fact when you're saying all these other things that surround it and are directly connected to the event? You admit they're not reliable. They're not historically reliable. So, Mike, what evidence do they have other than a statement that it's no doubt about the crucifixion? No doubt. Why, though? Like, this is the thing I've been wondering for years. I've been wanting and searching for years to see why any of the scholars who make that claim, why do they say it's certain or there's no doubts? But when we look at the evidence is not there. They appeal to the Gospels, which, Mr. Erhman himself tells us, are not historically reliable. They're not from eyewitness accounts. Right? You can see in the story itself, Pilate says he's innocent. And the only reason he kills him is because of this alleged release of a prisoner, and they choose Jesus Barabbas over Jesus the Christ, which Mr. Erhman says is also is either fabricated or not historical as well. If that's not historical and it's connected to the story itself, then how are we claiming that the crucifixion is the most certain thing in history when the story itself says the man was innocent and Pilate wanted to release him? So he chose to, gave him a choice. They chose the guy who was an actual murderer, insurrectionist. But Mr. Erhman says that that's not historically reliable. Okay, then if that's not historically reliable, which I agree that it doesn't make any sense that they would release an actual killer, an insurrectionist, and kill an innocent man, then how the hell is this crucifixion of Jesus even reliable when Pilate said he was innocent, according to the story? Or is the whole damn thing just a complete fabrication? You see what I'm saying? Go ahead, Wissam.
And don't forget what his certainty devolved into when he was approached with these very ideas. When I had a conversation with him, that was the first thing that we discussed. He did not have that certainty that he usually has when he's discussing with a Christian, when he's discussing with an agnostic, and he's just like giving a lecture or like a breakdown or something. I gave him all the like maybe 10% of the evidence, 10% of the facts. We didn't even go into redaction. We didn't go into any of that stuff. But he said, it's more plausible. It is more plausible that his early followers had mass hallucinations. They were like either smoking shrooms or sniffing cocaine all at the same time, and then woke up the next day thinking he was resurrected from the dead. It's more plausible that they had mass hallucinations than the Romans crucified the wrong guy and his disciples saw the real guy the next day or 3 days later. It's more plausible. Being somebody who goes for naturalistic explanations, he did not even try to poke holes in that argument. And I'm prepared for any attempt that he could make. But he didn't say that, it's not possible because, his early followers, we know for a fact that they thought that he was crucified, and we have records, we have documents, we have, like you said, like ossuaries or inscriptions or graffiti or enemy attestation or whatever. Of course he was crucified. We have early multiply attested. No, he didn't say that. He said, well, it's more, I've never seen anyone get mistakenly apprehended. Do you have to see it? Do you have to hear it? Like, it's not plausible? Have you seen anyone, you've heard stories. It's not possible that you've never heard of a cop, getting wrongly identifying somebody and taking them to jail instead of the actual culprit. Of course you have. And now in days without DNA evidence, in days without all means to like check about, or cameras or security footage, you don't think that anyone might have gotten crucified in those times based off of, you know, a wrong identification? That was his entire premise of why he rejects the idea that somebody else got crucified. And if that is his premise, then that's it. It is doubtful. It is not certain. You don't even have to be a scholar. You don't have to be a historian to say that one is more plausible than the other. It's just common sense.
Yeah, exactly. You know, but here, look, for Mike and the other, some of the people in the audience, look, let me read further what he says about this Barabbas incident, right? He says, is Pilate the sort of person who would kindly accede to the request of his Jewish subjects in light of their religious sensitivities? In fact, he was just the opposite kind of person. Not only do we have no record of him releasing prisoners to them once a year, or ever, knowing what we know about him, it seems completely implausible. I should point out that we don't have any evidence of any Roman governor anywhere in any of the provinces having such a policy, right? So he's admitting, he's like, that's completely fabricated. But yet, Mike and ABAB, it's connected directly to the charge of King of the Jews, where Pilate says he's innocent of. So if we're going to say that that part is unreliable, how is it that he's like, you know, sectioning off the charge of King of the Jews thing, but he's willing to say that the release of Barabbas and the execution of Jesus instead is somehow part of his historical certainty? Like, I don't see how you could do that. You know what I mean? If that is unreliable, then the execution has to be unreliable too. Because he said he was innocent in the story. He doesn't charge him with being a rebel. He doesn't charge him with being insurrections. He doesn't charge him with being, you know, the king of the Jews, literally. Right? He says he's innocent. Again, he repeated in the story. The man is innocent of the charges. I don't find him guilty of anything. So how then is Mr. Erhman saying that particular part is reliable, but everything else, yeah, these gospels are unreliable, historically unreliable. They're not by eyewitnesses, etc. But yet, yeah, let me take this little section right here, where meanwhile in the story itself, he wasn't charged with being king of the Jews. He wasn't charged with that. Pilate directly asked him, "Are you that? Are you claiming to be king of the Jews?" He says, "No. My kingdom's not of this world." Pilate agrees. He goes out to the Jews. "Hey, that charge you said, king of the Jews? Nah, he's innocent. I don't find him deserving of death at all." Right? So it's like, I'm sorry, but it's not adding up. It's not adding up. And again, all of those other people that you're quoting in the chat, Mike, again, what evidence do they have though? See? What evidence do they have? How is it the most certain thing? How is there no doubt? Based on what? You have nothing from the Roman records. I always mention the book, The Jesus Mysteries. Timothy Frecky, Peter Gannon, others have said it as well. Where they say, look, you know, they know the Romans were renowned for their record keeping. They say the Romans kept records of their trials and court proceedings. So they felt that they could go back to the Roman records to see this celebrated, because a lot of times people make the argument, well, you know, maybe it was an insignificant. No, the gospel says that this was a big case, that this wasn't no regular, you know, minor little case, insignificant court case that people would have, you know, like, like right now we go about our every day. There are people being in court every day during the week, and most of us pay no mind to it, right? But every once in a while there's a big court case. Like, what was the biggest one? OJ. Remember OJ back in the 90s, for those who were born then? That was a big case. We didn't pay attention to no other court cases. But when OJ was the trial, it was a big trial. It was on the news. It was everywhere. Everybody was talking about it throughout the country. Big trial. That was a case that caught people's attention. So the gospel makes it seem like the trial of Jesus caught a lot of people's attention. It wasn't a case where people just walk past the courtroom every day and or courthouse and pay no mind to it. No, a big crowds gathered. The Jewish leadership was involved. It was so much of a case that that Pilate, the governor of the region, instead of letting a local judge handle it, allegedly, the governor of the region was the one who presided over the trial, rather than just, you know, the local judges. You know what I'm saying? So that means this was a big case, and that's what they say in the Jesus Mysteries. that this was a celebrated case. So they figured we should have been able to find some mention about it in the Roman records. However, what do they tell us? They found no record of it at all. There's no record of the trial of Jesus. There's no record of the execution orders of Jesus. They found nothing from not the Gospels, from the actual Roman records of what appears to be a celebrated case where the governor had himself get involved. You see what I'm saying, Mike? So what do these people have as evidence rather than just statements? We believe it's the most certain thing in history. There's no doubts that it happened. It's the most secure fact. Yeah, okay, those are all statements. But what's the evidence to back up those statements? And as you're seeing from Mr. Erhman, there appears to be no evidence to really back it up. He's appealing to the very gospels that he himself told us are unreliable. He's appealing to the very gospel and the very section of the gospel story that he tells us is connected to unhistorical things or ahistorical things, such as the release of a prisoner and the release of Barabbas, an actual murderer, a man guilty of murder, a man guilty of being an insurrectionist. He tells us this is unreliable. This is not historical, yet it is directly connected to the supposed execution of Jesus. It's connected to the very charge of the King of the Jews, which Mr. Erhman admits Jesus never said he was King of the Jews. Nowhere in the Gospels. He admits that. I don't know if you were here earlier, Mike. So again, Mike, what evidence do any of these people have other than just their statement that it's reliable or that it's certain or there's no doubts? What evidence do they have to back up that it's actually certain, that there actually are no doubts? I haven't seen it. And believe me, I've been looking. Even as a Muslim, I've been looking. Not that I want to, I want Islam to be disproven, but truth is truth. If there's some truth out there, let me see it. I want to see it. I'm not afraid. But all praise is due to Allah. Y'all have no evidence. The best scholars don't have, as you can see, Mr. Erhman, and I like him. I like him. I'm a fan of his work. But on this, I see no evidence for this claim. I've seen no evidence for the claim of the supposed certainty of the crucifixion. I see none of it. None. And again, I'm trying to be very objective, but his own words make me further doubt. His own words, as you hear me reading, cause me to further doubt the certainty of it, which makes me question his claim of the certainty of it. Right? So it's very interesting. So let's read a little further to show you why he further says that this incident is false. Right? He says, and thinking about the alleged facts of the case for a second, how could there be such a policy? Barabbas in this account is not just a murderer, he is an insurrectionist. If he was involved with an insurrection, that means he engaged in an armed attempt to overthrow Roman rule. He murdered during the insurrection. He almost certainly would have murdered a Roman soldier or someone who collaborated with the Romans. Are we supposed to believe that the ruthless, iron-fisted Pilate would release a dangerous enemy of the state because the Jewish crowd would have liked him to do so? What did Romans do with insurrectionists? Did they set them free so they could engage in more armed guerrilla warfare? Would any ruling authority do this? Of course not. Would the Romans? Actually, we know what they did with insurrectionists. They crucified them. Okay then, Mr. Erhman, how then are you telling us it's certain that Jesus got killed when he was innocent of being an insurrectionist? He was innocent of the charge of King of the Jews. Pilate says it, and he says it more than one time. Like the Gospels are trying to make it very clear that Pilate understood and declared Jesus to be innocent. He clearly made that. They make that clear. They all make that clear. Yet Erhman is relying on the charge of King of the Jews as the reason he believes it actually happened when the charge actually didn't go through. Like, again, I know I'm repeating myself, brothers. I'm repeating myself, and I know I am. But again, I'm doing it because I'm still in my head, trying to make sense of it, man. It just doesn't make any sense. And here, let me add something too, because he talks about it again in another blog, as you see on the screen. This one is titled "Pilate and Barabbas." Right? He says, I have received a number of interesting responses to my comments about Pontius Pilate. the Romans' use of crucifixion, and the likelihood that, as a rule, Romans did not allow decent burials for the victims but left them to scavenging birds and animals, helpless, defenseless, and in agony. A couple of people have suggested that since Pilate had the custom of releasing a prisoner to the crowd during the Passover, this would show a basic interest in placating the crowds and might suggest that he would indeed be willing to observe Jewish custom and law by removing the bodies and allowing for proper burial. This account of Pilate's willingness is, of course, in all the Gospels, right? Matthew and Luke have picked it up from Mark. It is not in the fragment of the Gospel of Peter that we have. So he goes on to say, let's see what he says. He says, I appreciate this comment, and I realized that there was something going on in the back of my mind that I should have put up front even before I started talking about Pilate not carrying a twit about Jewish customs and law. That is that I think the story of him releasing a prisoner is completely apocryphal, and that the gospel narrative about Barabbas being preferred by the crowds is not historical, but legendary. Okay then, if that's how you feel, how then do you feel that Jesus was actually executed in the same connected position?
But instead of saying it's completely apocryphal and opening up more holes, what would solve every single one of his problems is that Pilate released the innocent man.
Right.
Then you have absolutely no historical problems to worry about. Mm-hmm. Nothing.
Right.
He crucified the insurrectionist. Jesus is out. His companions see him, and they preach his message. That's it. Like, why is that so much more? Why you have to run in hoops and try to say, oh, this wasn't historical? It's because they wanted to intensify the blame of the Jews upon the crucifixion of Jesus rather than the Romans, and do all of these things and avoid the redactions and avoid being contradictory in your stances about how you take the New Testament. When am I crazy? Wouldn't you just saying that he released Jesus? They're both called Jesus. You see the scribal tendencies to remove the name Jesus. I mean, the manuscripts existed in the time of Origen, and he said that it's inconceivable that a man named that an insurrectionist and a murderer would have the same name as my Lord. So this can't be the right reading. So we have early manuscripts and preserved in the Western text that says his name was Jesus, and he accepts that as the original reading. So does Daniel Wallace and others. So if they're both called Jesus, his last name is Son of the Father. Jesus is calling himself the Son of the Father, never King of the Jews. Never King of the Jews. And one is innocent, you declare his innocence, and the other one is not. He's a murderer and an insurrectionist. It solves all of your problems to just say Jesus was released and Barabbas was crucified instead. Case closed.
Yeah, and check this out. Look what he further showed. Look how he further puts into questions the very gospels that he's appealing to and the very story of the crucifixion. Look what he says here. He says the irony is heightened by the name given to this fictitious figure in the tradition. Barabbas is an Aramaic name that literally means son of the father. The name is not an accident. The Jewish crowds are given a choice between two sons of the father who are very different. Do the Jewish crowds want the military leader and the violent son of the father, or the spiritual leader and merciful son of the father? They choose, and for the gospel writers, they choose badly. The irony is heightened with the passage of time. In the Gospel of Matthew, we are told that Barabbas had a first name. There he is called Jesus Barabbas, right? Matthew chapter 27, verses 16-17. A large number of our manuscripts have eliminated the name Jesus from these verses, so Barabbas is not called Jesus Barabbas, but just Barabbas. So stop right there, everybody. So once again, he's confirming the corruption of their scriptures. So again, with all of this being told, Mr. Erhman, how then is the crucifixion a most certain fact of history? Yet the things that are directly connected to it, directly surrounded, you're telling us, have been corrupted. They're removing the names of the guy. You know, he's a fictitious character in the first place. It's unlikely that Pilate ever did this in history. It doesn't make sense that he would release an actual insurrectionist and kill an innocent man. You know what I mean? But yet you're telling us it's the most certain thing in history. Yet here you are telling us further corruption of these texts. They removed the name to try to hide it, and because they didn't want the thing between Jesus the Christ and Jesus the Son of the Father, which sounds like it could be talking about Jesus, either Jesus, because Jesus was also called Son of the Father as well. He's the Son of God, right? Exactly. You know what I'm saying? So you're admitting further that the scriptures have been corrupted. They're removing names. But you, for some reason, on this particular part, believe that the crucifixion is certain, yet everything connected to it, surrounding it, is corrupted, fabricated, didn't exist in history, fictitious character. You know what I'm saying, brother? We sound like, come on.
Sure, for sure. And what's interesting, and not even a lot of Christians know about this kind of, I guess, esoteric thing that happens. So there's a codex. It's a full biblical text, almost full, called Codex Bezae. It's not really even too far removed from Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus. It's a very early Christian, New Testament, almost complete. It's dated to around the 5th century, like around 350 to 370, give or take. So, and Sinaiticus and Vaticanus are two of the most important. They're dated around 340, 330. So the same text, Yeshadi, the same exact codex that has the name Jesus Barabbas, removes Jesus from the Gospel of Mark. Removes Jesus from the Gospel according to Mark in the crucifixion narrative. So in the Gospel according to Mark, this might be like a little bit of a tangent. Actually, it's the same kind of. It's not off topic. So in Gospel of Mark chapter 15 verses 21, this is where it's talking about Simon of Cyrene, which John eliminates. I mean, Mike is a Christian here, and he's actually just bypassing all of this evidence by his text. And that's what we discussed yesterday. By hook or crook, they're going to substantiate Jesus' crucifixion. That's all they live for. Not the Bible, not the miracles, not the teachings. The Bible could just be Harry Potter 99%, and then the crucifixion of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus, the rest, and they'll still accept it. It can be a cookbook with Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. They will still accept it. That's all they want. That's all they want. Regardless of, there are a million fictitious things derived from Greek mythology, derived to counter heresies, derived for all sorts of purposes, whether they're changing their text, the scribes and the actual authors themselves. They don't care. They don't care about any of that. But okay, Mark chapter 15, verse 21. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha. This is what you'll read in your NIVs, in your in your King James, and everything else. The text does not say Jesus. They're manipulating the text in order to make it. This is the Gospel of Mark, or at least an Aramaic version of the Gospel of Mark, is what Basilides used. What Basilides used in order to say that Simon of Cyrene was crucified, and this is why. Even as we have it today, we don't know how the Gospel of Mark looked originally. We have absolutely no access to the 1st century. We have to wait till Sinaiticus for like 90% of the Gospel of Mark. We have P137 and P45, which are fragments constituting a small part of the Gospel of Mark. But for these passages, you have to wait until Sinaiticus. So it doesn't say Jesus. It says they brought him to the place called Golgotha, talking about Simon of Cyrene. A certain man from Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way from the country. And they forced him to carry the cross. They forced him to autos, the Greek word autos. Okay. Then they offered him wine mixed with wort, but he did not take it. Remember, in the Gospel of John, he did take it. In the Gospel of John, he did drink the wine. So there's a contradiction there. But he did not take it. And they crucified him. Okay, so you have Jesus drinking the wine in the Gospel of John. This guy did not drink it. Mm-hmm. And they crucified him, still talking about the same him, Simon of Cyrene, dividing up his clothes. They cast lots to see what each would get. Then Matthew and Luke and John develop it to say that it's fulfilling a prophecy. It was 9 a.m. The Gospel of John says it was the 3rd hour. It's supposed to say it was the 3rd hour. And the Gospel of John says it was the 6th hour when they crucified. A different day, by the way. Preparation of the Passover to the actual Passover. It's a different day. And the written on the charge, look at all of this. They'll bypass every single piece of information I'm giving you right now. As long as Jesus was crucified. They will lie about extra biblical texts as long as Jesus was crucified. Okay. So the written notice of the charge against him read, the King of the Jews. In Matthew and in John, it says Jesus, the King of the Jews. It's telling you exactly who he is. Okay. They crucified two rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. Okay, let me actually scroll down here. Give me 1 second. Okay, so they crucified two rebels, or two robbers, with him, one on his right and one on his left. And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, and he was numbered with the transgressors. Okay, and those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads, saying, so you are going to destroy the temple and build it up in 3 days. They're mocking the wrong guy. 30. Come down from the cross and save yourself. Verse 30. He saved others but can't save himself. Verse 31. Let this Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross that we may believe. 32. Still talking about him. No mention of Jesus. At noon, darkness came over the land. Or at the 6th hour, darkness came over the land until the 9th hour. And at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. Here is the first mention of the name Jesus since the word Simon of Cyrene. Okay, and the same text that removed Jesus, that has the authentic reading Jesus Barabbas, doesn't have Jesus in here. You can go look at the collation. Go check out Codex Bezae. Codex Bezae does not have Jesus. It just says he cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. Now, does it make more sense for the prophet, for the promised Messiah of God, to be quoting a scripture where he's blaspheming? Or there's actually a textual variant for Mark anyway that says, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. Elijah, Elijah, why did you forsake me? And in the context, actually, it says, oh, look, he's crying out for Elijah. And there's another actual textual variant that's found within the Caesarean line that's attributed to the separationist movements within early Christianity that says, God, oh God, why have you reviled me? Why have you reviled me? Inshallah, after this talk, I'm going to link the lecture by Michael Holmes, like Christian, actually, who says that that's the original reading. Why have you reviled me? Okay, talk about criterion of embarrassment. Why have you reviled me? Okay, and the same codex that has the original reading, Codex Bezae, for Jesus Barabbas, removes Jesus here. It's perfectly consistent. Now it says that he cried out with a loud voice. Now, the next time Jesus appears in Mark, let me show you. Okay. Shadid, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. So, okay. Oh my God, what did you say to me? Okay. No, you'd have to go to actually chapter 16. Okay. Okay, so if you go to Mark chapter 16, it's the last chapter. It ends at verse 8, but of course, scribes added 12 verses for his resurrection appearances. Now, this is what the angel says when the ladies go, or whoever it was. So the women, they go to the tomb to see Jesus, to anoint him, apparently not knowing at all that he was supposed to be resurrected. It's the third day. They have no idea that he's supposed to be resurrected. So where are those passion predictions? Okay. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought up spices so that they may go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first week, just after the sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? But when they looked up, they saw the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. And they entered the tomb and saw a young man dressed in white robe, sitting on the right side. Who is the young man? Who is the young man? It doesn't say an angel, doesn't say anything. I mean, angels can disguise themselves as people, but we know of a young man earlier in Mark who had a white robe. And this is the same Mark when the secret gospel of Mark was training with Jesus to be inside the tomb. But he says, but they found him there. They found this young man there by the tomb. And what does he say? Okay. So Shadid, can you do me a favor? Can you read Mark chapter 16, verse 6?
Mark 16, verse 6. All right, let's see. Verse 6. All right, it says, "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him."
Okay, awesome. So it says Jesus the Nazarene, right?
Right.
You know the text in the actual Greek does not say Jesus.
Oh, really? Oh.
It just says you are looking for the Nazarene.
Hmm.
He has. What does it say in your translation?
He has risen. He is not here. He was crucified. It says, yeah. It says you're looking for Jesus the Nazarene. Right? Yeah. Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. Yeah.
Yep. He has risen. He's not here. In Matthew, the same incident. It says he is not here. He has been resurrected, just like he told you. Mentioning, oh, you silly women, you know he's not supposed to be here. He's been resurrected. Don't you remember? Whereas in Mark, it says he has risen. So and go and see the place where they laid him. But the word Jesus is not in the text. I will put my.
Wow. And you know what? It's funny because they all the translations have Jesus there. They all have his name. From what I'm looking at, Jesus. Yep, they all say Jesus. Yep.
Wait, I'll show you right here.
Jesus. Looks like all the translations put his name there. Jesus. Yep. They all say his name.
They do. So Mark 16, 6. I don't know why it's freezing. You can talk until I find it, inshallah. I'll be right back.
Okay, all right. So while he's looking it up, I'm gonna read a little bit more, and this kind of backs up what he was saying about how they took the name out and all that stuff like that of Jesus Barabbas. Not in the last part, but in the part with Barabbas. Here's what he says here. He says, where was I at? About the manuscripts? Yeah, a large number of our manuscripts have eliminated the name Jesus from these verses, so Barabbas is not called Jesus Barabbas or Barabbas, but just Barabbas. But you can see why scribes would be offended by the full name, since Jesus was a sacred name to them. But I think the original text almost certainly gave him the full name Jesus Barabbas. So he admits it. He admits that he thinks the original text had the name Jesus Barabbas there, but some of the scribes were offended by him having the same name, so they removed it. But again, this brings a lot of things into question, which is if the scribes believed that this was the word of God and the name Jesus Barabbas was there, why would you why would you dare remove it? Right? Why would you dare try to hide that fact? Because again, he's like you said, we can see why they would, be offended by that. And of course, others could see the confusion that could take place. One guy is Jesus the Christ. The other is Jesus, the Son of the Father. Both titles of Jesus, the main character of the story. So which one is it? Did they, which one is free? Did Jesus, the Son of the Father, which is the name of the Jesus that you believe in, or Jesus the Christ, which is also the name of the Jesus that you believe in? You know what I mean? So, but here's what he says to go further. He says, wow, which Jesus, Son of the Father, do you prefer? The one who sponsors armed rebellion against Rome, or the one who brings salvation from sins? Pilate in Matthew asked the crowd whether they want the insurrectionist or the Messiah, and they prefer the insurrectionist, which again, remember in the other blog, Bart said that that was completely, not factual at all, and it didn't make any sense that they would do that. And then this is only Matthew. He washes his hands of the blood of the innocent man and releases to the crowd the guilty man that they demand. Pilate finds Jesus not worthy of punishment. Y'all heard that, right? Remember what he said? Remember, again, this is all connected to his claim. His claim of the certainty of the crucifixion relies on that particular point, that Pilate killed Jesus because he was guilty of claiming to be king of the Jews. Yet, what is he saying right here? Pilate finds Jesus not worthy of punishment. But the crowd cries out, his blood be upon us and our children. So again, he admits, as you see here, now he's admitting here that Pilate found Jesus not worthy of punishment. Therefore, he only kills him, not because he's guilty of calling himself king of the Jews, but because the crowd wanted it. But he says the story is fabricated. And matter of fact, watch what he says here. Look, he says, and so the anti-Judaism of the passage in Mark is heightened even further in Matthew. And in both instances, as in the other Gospels, the anti-Jewish telling of the tale is rooted not in historical recollection. Let me read that again. The anti-Jewish telling of the tale is rooted not in historical recollection, I think, but in a legendary addition to the narrative. One that almost, now he says certainly again, one that almost certainly, in my opinion, is not historical. Certainly, in my opinion, is not historical. But yet, on the other side, the crucifixion of Jesus is certainly historical, or is something most certain in history, or is one of the most secure facts in history. But then here you are right here talking about an event that is directly connected to the event that you said is certainly historical. You're telling us that this is certainly, in your opinion, not historical. Well, Mr. Erhman, Professor, like, what's going on here? How is it that you believe that it's certain, yet here you are saying that these events connected directly to it, that are directly part of the actual charge that you think is supposedly historical? You tell us that this thing is certainly, in your opinion, not historical. It's certainly, he says, certainly is not historical. But you believe the crucifixion by the Romans is certainly historical. You can't believe that. You can't really believe that. It's like you're double talking here. He can't really believe this, brothers and sisters. And this is what we're demonstrating. I can't see how he can claim that it's, and believe it, that it's certainly historical, yet say these other things that undermine that very claim. Y'all see it. I hope y'all can. I believe y'all can see it. I know y'all see this. So yeah, there it is, man. That's how he says it. He says it's not rooted in historical recollection. He thinks, but is a legendary addition. It's a legendary addition to the narrative, one that almost certainly, in my opinion, is not historical. Then I don't see how you can claim that the crucifixion was historical, is a secure fact. I don't see it. And again, especially since he bases it on the charge of King of the Jews, which, as he just admitted, Pilate finds Jesus not worthy of punishment. So if the story says he finds him not worthy of punishment, how do you think that it's a secure fact of history that he got killed for that reason? When Pilate says he's not worthy in the story, I mean, again, I've said this several times throughout this podcast that I don't see how he can do that, and I'm sure you don't see how he can do it either. And I would like to see. Maybe I don't know. We'd have to talk to him directly to find out. But again, these are his words. These are his writing. He wrote this himself. So I really can't see how he could make that claim that is certain, based upon what he says about these other things directly connected to it. So yeah, are you back, brother Wissam? Okay, I think he's still trying to find the thing. Oh, you're back now. Okay.
Okay, let me show you guys. Oops.
For the people on YouTube, I'm sorry, I was just talking. I forgot I didn't have it on the screen. So what I just read to you guys, what you just heard me read for the YouTube audience, there it is right there. I just posted it so you can read exactly what I just read to you, where you can see everything I just said. He talks about the corruption, how they removed the name, which again shows that you can't really trust it in full, at least, you know what I mean? But here they removed the name Barabbas, the name Jesus, but he believes that the originals probably did say Jesus, but they removed it. You know what I'm saying? So that shows corruption right there. He admits that Jesus was not worthy of punishment by Pilate, but it was because of the crowd wanted him to die, which he already said that he didn't think that would happen, that's not historical, that Pilate did that, or any Roman governor did that at all. So therefore that brings further doubt of it. He adds at the end that he says that this part is not rooted in historical and is not rooted in historical recollection. He thinks it's a legendary addition to the narrative, but one that is certainly, in his opinion, not historical. So, like, there you have it. So again, if that's the case, how is the crucifixion then a most certain thing or secure fact of history when clearly these things you're telling us are not historical, right? But go ahead, Brother Wissam.
Okay, yep, so I updated my PTR. You guys can see it. I was actually, there's two variants, but I kind of misplaced them. So the first one is about Mark chapter 16 verse 1, the first verse. That's this one right here, where the translations say they went to anoint his body. They went to anoint Jesus' body. Here you can see the same thing that's in the same phenomenon in Mark chapter 15, where they replaced him with Jesus. Again, the word is autos, which means his, or auton in this case. And then the second one, it's not Jesus that was removed; it's the Nazarene. It's the Nazarene. So, and then let me post that up. So, and it says, "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen." So this Nazarene part is not in Sinaiticus. It's in a what's called a superscript. Let me actually post that real quick. Verse 6. I wish it was easier to... Oh, there we go. Okay, now if you reload your screens, you'll see that the word Nazarene from the top, from the first source. So the collation website is ordered chronologically from the earliest manuscript to the latest manuscript. So the first one here in both rows is Sinaiticus, the earliest text that we have for this. We don't have even any fragments of Mark. Imagine this: we don't have any fragments of the last, the bulk of Mark actually, but for especially the last chapters of Mark, we don't have any for 300 years. 300 years after his death. But you can see that the first chart, I can't zoom in on mine. It says Ton Nazarion, which means the Nazarene. The first one is empty. That's Codex Sinaiticus. The second block is actually Codex Sinaiticus too, but the scribal hand. So they're not sure that it was even added later. That's why in red you'll see it highlighted in red, meaning it's an imposition, meaning they think it's there. But in the primary hand of Codex Sinaiticus, it's not there. So the Nazarene could have been inserted to distinguish which Jesus was crucified. You understand?
Yeah, I get it. Hopefully the audience, you were able to understand this point as well. So, yeah, I mean, again, the whole thing is just surrounded with controversy, everybody. From people messing with the text, messing with the manuscripts, to the story itself being, ahistorical, unreliable, historically unreliable, not eyewitnesses. Like there's all these problems with it. Yet we have all these people with, saying, Mr. Erhman and Mike is quoting all these people claiming that it's the most certain thing and there's no doubt about it. But again, based on what? How is it most certain? How is it no doubt when everything surrounding it is doubtful? Corruption of the text. Mr. Erhman talks about that, removing the name. They took off the name Jesus Barabbas just so it could say Barabbas because they didn't want it, to be a confusion between the Jesuses and all of that, right? So, right? He admits that, again, first of all, that, and then even with that, it didn't happen. There's no evidence of that ever happening, of releasing prisoners on this, no evidence of that. Pilate didn't have the character to do that. He wasn't known to do that. No Roman governors. Like, the whole thing is surrounded with contradiction, controversy, corruption of the text, things that are admitted to be, ahistorical, like all these issues with it. But yet you got these scholars talking about most certain thing, no doubts, you can believe it, except, you know what I mean? Like, no, I'm sorry, Mike and other Christians. Sorry. Other than just statements of appeal to authority, there's no evidence to support it. As or at least with Mr. Erhman, as he himself is pointing out, there's no reason why we should take it as a certain fact of history. There's no reason that he, and by his own writings, to show that we should take it as the most certain thing of history or a secure fact of history. There's no reason. By his own writings, that as you heard us demonstrate and show you yourself to see it, that there's just no reason to come to that conclusion. And it goes for the other scholars. They don't have anything either. Yeah, I'm gonna go on record saying they don't have anything either. They don't have anything either. It's just a statement. That's all it is. It's just a statement. And anybody who uses them, you're just appealing to authority. This scholar says, he says, they all say, but where's the evidence for it? Where's the evidence for what they say? They don't have it. They don't have it. Right? And if they're honest, they'll have to admit, like Mr. Erhman admits, that there was no evidence that Pilate ever did this. Right? He clearly says he's innocent in the story itself. There's no evidence that that Pilate would ever act like this, that he would ever, declare that a man is innocent and then still release a guy who was known to be a threat to the Roman Empire and let him go and kill. Like, right? You know what I mean? Like, they admit that's highly unlikely. It's not historical. But yet crucifixion of Jesus is somehow historical. Well, I believe, inshallah, that we presented the evidence to let you all see that although he may say that it's the certain thing, but it's clear that his work demonstrates that the crucifixion is not certain, and that he himself cannot really be certain of the crucifixion by his own words. By his own words. Contradictory as they are, but there's no way he can say that it's the most certain thing or a secure fact. And then turn around and say all these other things that undermine that very statement. I don't see how he can really feel that way. But maybe, inshallah, we'll get the chance to ask him that directly one day and see how he, will perhaps make some sense of it. Right? But we'll go ahead and end it there. I'd like to thank my brother Wissam for being a co-host on this particular discussion. Thank you for sharing your interaction with him from the blog. We appreciate that. Again, fair use. If there's any issues that arise, we're just fair use. We're just using it to, and again, most of the stuff that I showed, you can read it from not being a subscriber. So it's not like we're hiding or giving you something that is only reserved for subscribers. When you go to his page, the stuff that I gave, that I read, it's on the free part, the part that he allows people who are not subscribed to his blog to read, as a sample. So, so it's just fair use. Again, brother Wissam shared his particular part, that he is a member of the blog, and he shared his own personal interaction. So I don't think that should be a problem. But again, in any case, fair use. All right. Let me see. With that, don't forget to support the content. Right. Join our Patreon. You know what I mean? We got a lot of valuable information that we share with people who are interested concerning these various topics. And as we continue to go forward, we'll continue to share more information, more notes that you can use for your own personal study. If you decide that you want to get into the field of debating and apologetics and whatever, these notes will help you. Some of these notes are the very notes that I've used in my debates against some of the heavyweights of Christianity, James White, etc. These are the actual notes that I've used, so you can get access to those notes for your own personal study if you become a member of my Patreon. As you see, for those who are on YouTube, it's right on the screen. For those on Clubhouse, just go to my my profile. You know, and in return for your support to help me further my dawah efforts, you'll get the notes to use for your own personal use in return. Check out my book, Clearing Jesus of Blasphemy. It's on Amazon paperback and Amazon Kindle. That's available here on the YouTube channel, as well as on my profile on Clubhouse. With that, you know, we thank you for your support. You're checking us out, listening in. May Allah reward you. Brother Wissam, do you have any last words you'd like to share? Maybe share your, your social media where people can follow you. I know you got a lot of good information to share as well.
No, inshallah. Just, I don't want to really promote anything, but just keep an open mind to any Christians who are listening to this. And the message of the Quran is, إن الذين اختلفوا فيه لفي شك منه وما قتلوه يقينا. That those who disagreed concerning it, again, early Christians disagreed on whether he was crucified. That's a historical fact. The Gospels contain redactions in order to make more solid the fact of the incident of his crucifixion. That is a fact. You can see it in real time happening right before your eyes. Okay, there were actual incidents that were invented, things that were omitted in certain authors, like we've described throughout the duration of this video, in order to make it seem more likely that Jesus was crucified and not somebody else. But what the Quran says, those who disagreed concerning it are in doubt. لَفِي شَكٍ مِّنْهِ. They are in doubt. If you have this information in front of you, then the least you can possibly conclude at is that it's doubtful. And if it's doubtful, you're in doubt about the entire premise of your faith. And we did not even touch on, because this whole thing was just supposed to be about Erhman. But inshallah ta'ala, we'll do more streams about the issue of theologically. Theologically, does this concept make sense? Which is even a bigger can of worms. The entire premise of why he needed to be crucified anyway. And do the Romans have a vested interest in actually pursuing that type of theology rather than having, a Jesus who was raised and things like that? So the Quran says that it is a doubtful matter. And if it's established that it's doubtful, which I think we've demonstrated, then it's correct. It's absolutely correct in what it says.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, and I'll add that too. Yes, that for those watching, understand that the position we're coming from is the Islamic position, which states very clearly that Jesus did not die by any other means of anybody, the Jews particularly killing him, or nor did he die by being put on the cross. Right? The Quran says in chapter 4, verse 157, and because of their saying, we killed the Messiah. But they killed him not, nor crucified him. But it appeared so to them. And those who differ therein are full of doubts. They have no certain knowledge of it. They follow nothing but conjecture. For surely they killed him not. And as you can see, this not only applies to the Christians, but apparently it applies to people like Mr. Erhman, who is no longer a Christian, but still wants to claim that the crucifixion of Jesus took place and is a certain thing. But as we demonstrated, he's doing what Allah says. He's following nothing but conjecture as well. He's following nothing but conjecture as well. He's appealing back to the very documents that he tells us are unreliable, that he told us are not from eyewitnesses, that he told us were written decades later by people who were not the followers of Jesus, by Greek-speaking people, not the illiterate fishermen who followed Jesus. He told us this. So he's following nothing but conjecture as well concerning this. But Allah made it clear, for surely they killed him not. and all this stuff that they claim about it is just what Allah said. It's the following of nothing but conjecture. They have no certain knowledge of it. None of those people that Mike, for example, mentioned have certain knowledge of it. Mr. Erhman clearly doesn't have certain knowledge of it, as he himself has demonstrated that the things surrounding it are not historical, fabricated, removing of names, adding of stuff, additions to the story. He has said it himself. So he doesn't have certain knowledge of it either. He's following nothing but conjecture either when it comes to this subject. So we will end it there. With that, we ask Allah to guide us, and those of you who are not Muslim, we ask Allah to guide you as well, to show you the truth, to open your eyes and your heart to the truth that Islam has to offer, whether it's concerning this issue or any of the other issues. Because Islam, we've demonstrated, myself, Brother Wissam, other brothers and sisters who are in this field, I think we've demonstrated over and over again that the truth stands with Islam. So you guys seeing this information, you need to decide what you're going to do. How do you want to see your fate when it comes, and your relationship with the true God, and make your decision on that. So we'll end it with that. Again, we ask for Allah's blessing. May Allah reward us. We bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is his last and final messenger. Again, Brother Wissam, any last words to take us out?
No, I'll just inshallah recite the ayah. Subhanakallah. Well, the hadith of al-intilaq. So, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك, which roughly translated means, glory be to you, Allah, and with your praise I bear witness that there is none that has the right to be worshipped except you. I seek your forgiveness and I turn to you.
Ameen. So what we'll do, okay, for the YouTube people, I'm going to end the YouTube show right now. But for those on Clubhouse, we said we would allow people to come up, and then we can just have like a popcorn free discussion from there on out. All right. So I'm going to end the podcast on YouTube. The live stream will be ended. And if you are a member of Clubhouse, come on over to Clubhouse, and then we can all discuss it in a like popcorn style discussion. So, all right. Appreciate it. So let's open it up on Clubhouse we'll start bringing people up to discuss.
You're really letting Charlie up here?
Wait, that's the Charlie? I thought that was a different guy. I thought I blocked it. He must have changed his name. Okay, no. My bad. Yeah, I didn't recognize it. I thought it was a different one because I haven't blocked.
So I have a question.
Oh, okay. This is the other Charlie. This is not the Charlie's. This is the other Charlie guy. Okay. What you got, Charlie? What's your question? Although this one is bad too. This one is bad too. But we'll give him a shot.
No, I'm not bad.
Charlie.
So I just had a comment. Sorry. Is Erhman really certain of the crucifixion of Jesus? Yes, I would say he is very certain of the crucifixion. That happened. He says Erhman is certain of the crucifixion. It did happen, so that's he's certain of. That's what I have to say, I guess.
You're right.
Yeah, bro. Like, what are you saying, Charlie? What?